You step onto sand that wasn't always a stage and listen for the older heartbeat beneath the drums. Long before crowds learned to chant names like songs, the Romans told themselves that blood could keep promises with the dead. You're not in the Colosseum yet, you're in a smaller, stranger space. An open forum where a noble family mourns in public and pays the oldest kind of respect, a funeral that borrows courage from combat. It's the 3rd century BC by one reckoning, and a pair of armed men face one another not for a purse or applause, but because the shade of an ancestor is owed a gift that no one can wrap. The early Romans called such offerings munera, duties, obligations, and the first gladiatorial fights are exactly that, grim presents for the departed. The story walks forward with sandals that scuff. Livy and later writers remember 264 BC as a marker. At the funeral of Junius Brutus Pera, his sons staged 3 pairs of fighters in Rome's cattle market, the Forum Boarium. A small crowd watches, half curious, half uneasy, as the idea takes its first breath in public. A century later, the numbers grow, the families grander, the venues more deliberate. Private munera remain obligations to the dead, but the living notice something: people are showing up. And where Romans gather, politics recognizes a stage. Mainstream fact to stake in the sand, gladiatorial combat in Rome likely drew from Italic precedents, Campanian, Etruscan funerary customs that featured armed pairings, before becoming a Roman municipal habit, then a national appetite. By the late Republic, munera migrate from funerals into festival calendars, and magistrates, chiefly aediles, sponsor games to burnish reputations. Julius Caesar, never one to ignore a crowd, famously offers lavish munera in 65 BC. The Senate curtails his excess, which is very Roman, moderation by committee. By the time Augustus tightens the state's grip on spectacle, the transition is nearly complete, from private duty to public institution. You stand in a makeshift arena and feel how ritual teaches theater its lines. The crest of the helmet, the angle of the shield, the formal salute to presiding magistrate or family head, each gesture, once meant to flatter ghosts, now flatters voters and gods alike. The combats remain stylized. Duels, not melees, and outcomes range from submission to death, with moments of choreography and moments of the ad hoc. But the air thickens with expectation. Sponsors begin to hire trainers, contract fighters, build temporary wooden stands. The sand now knows carpenters' names as well as priests. Historians still argue whether the Etruscan route was dominant, or if Campania's Greek-inflected spectacles mattered more, whether the earliest Roman fights were mostly to the death or often ritualized submissions with occasional fatal outcomes, and how quickly state oversight replaced family patronage. What survives in text is fragmentary. What survives in stone has learned to speak sparsely. But the broad curve is clear. Funerary obligation becomes civic entertainment, becomes imperial policy. Quirky tidbit: the word munus, duty, gift, lingers long after the funerary origin fades. Programs still call shows munera when emperors are in full propaganda bloom. On mosaic captions and inscriptions, a gladiator wins a munus, as if he'd earned a complicated present at a holiday party you wouldn't describe to a child. Another sly survival. Even in the grand age of the Colosseum, some local towns host small, memorial games for notables, a nod to ancestral custom wrapped in municipal pride. Follow the money and the calendar and you arrive at the moment when wood isn't enough. As Rome's population swells and imperial ambition acquires a stone vocabulary, temporary arenas become embarrassments. Amphitheaters in the provinces. Pompeii's is famous and notorious for a deadly riot in 59 C. Teach Rome a lesson: fixed seating, controlled entries, orchestrated views equals safer crowds and better politics. Enter the Flavian dynasty with a promise. After Nero's excesses and the year of the 4 emperors, let us give you stability you can sit on. Vespasian orders an amphitheater on the drained site of Nero's private lake. His son Titus will dedicate it in AD-C with 100 days of shows that teach marble how to absorb noise. The Amphitheatrum Flavium earns the nickname Colosseum not for its shape but for the colossal statue of Nero that once loitered nearby, now repurposed like an old rumor. But stop short of the Flavian arches for a moment, and keep your feet in the Republic's dust. The lanista, the trainer owner, has already become a familiar figure, and gladiators an identifiable class of contracted fighters. Some are enslaved, some condemned, some volunteers, octorati, who trade social standing for pay and the strange fame of the sand. The ludi, training schools house and feed them. Contracts spell out risks, rewards, and limits. Oaths bite down hard. To be burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. A creed that turns consent into spectacle. Even at this early stage, you can hear the economy humming. Arms, armor, doctors who know how to stitch without asking too many questions, cooks with a talent for barley porridge, and booking agents in togas. Light joke 1. A junior edile says he's sponsoring a small munis. To honor my late uncle. A rival says, wonderful, what's your vote target? Light joke 2. A lanista claims his recruits eat better than senators. A senator replies that barley is not a lifestyle. Light joke 3. A priest complains that funeral games are getting too noisy. A vendor says, so are funerals. Rituals still drapes today. The pampa, a procession with musicians, priests, and the fighters themselves, moves like incense through a street that expects news. The fighters salute the sponsor, sometimes the tomb, now more often the magistrate or emperor's image. There are offerings at small shrines tucked near staging areas, charms against bad luck, nods to Nemesis, a whispered bargain with Hercules or Mars. The crowd, learning its role, practices the collective gasp and the persuasive thumb, though the modern, simple up/down cliché hides a messier reality of signals, shouts, and sponsors' privilege. Mainstream anchor, because facts like anchors. The earliest secure date for gladiatorial combat in Rome is 264 BC. By the late 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, games attached to public office and festival cycles, Sulla, Caesar, and Pompey all used them politically. Augustus codifies limits on the number of pairs and who may sponsor. By the 1st century CE, the imperial household largely monopolizes the grandest shows, though local elites still stage games across the empire. The funerary route survives in vocabulary and occasional practice, but the center of gravity moves to public festivals and imperial birthdays. Historians still argue whether the audience in the earliest phase skewed elite and invited, or whether from the start these were spectacles that welcomed the street. Seating plans in Republic contemporary stands are ghosts. Moralists sniff that the lowborn are everywhere, which could mean many, or simply, too many for my comfort. They also argue how, religious, the ritual remained once the state's propaganda needs took the wheel. Is the pompa piety or pageantry? Is the salute devotion or etiquette? You can hear both answers in the same drumbeat. Stand quietly and look at the fighters themselves, these first, gifts to the dead who will become gifts to the living's boredom and fear. They are not the savage brawlers of bad modern imagination. Even now their gear is themed, their pairings thought through. Heavy shield against netman, curved blade against straight, regional styles turned into costumes with rules. It will all become more codified in the imperial era, but even here the audience is being taught to watch types, not just men. The ritual teaches the eye a taxonomy, and taxonomies become myths. Quirky tidbit 2, some of the earliest commemorative inscriptions for gladiators are surprisingly affectionate. A stone will record not only a man's wins and losses, but a nickname, and a note from a lover or patron. The economy may be new, but the human habit of making celebrities out of risk is ancient and incurable. Another small curiosity. In a few towns, Mourners hire pairs to fight at the grave and strictly forbid killing, ritual without fatality. As if the ghosts wanted drama but not grief. You step back and the centuries compress. What began as a hard promise at a funeral becomes a ladder for politicians, then a scaffold for emperors to climb and wave from. The Colosseum isn't a break with the past so much as an administrative decision. Centralize the ritual, scale it, sanitize its edges, and make sure the crowd leaves thinking the state is large enough to choreograph death and merciful enough to spare it when mood or propaganda requires. The sand remembers its first duty, but it also learns to count tickets. By the time you finally walk under the Colosseum's arches in your mind, the ritual has been repainted as entertainment, and the entertainment has been notarized as policy. You can still smell funeral smoke under the perfume of roasting nuts. You can still hear a whisper about ancestors between the brass and the stamp of soldiers' feet. The origins persist like a bass line under an anthem. Duty, display, decision. Someone will die, someone will kneel, someone will owe the gods a promise renewed. And somewhere, a ledger will balance, because Rome never builds anything, ritual, road, or rumor, without learning how to write a budget for it. You stand where a lake used to laze and feel the ground's memory change temperature. Nero had kept a private mirror of sky here, the artificial pond of his Domus Aurea, a luxury as modest as a trumpet. Vespasian drains it with the practicality of a man who prefers applause to reflections and draws a rectangle of intention in its mud. Give the lake back to the people, he says in masonry, and you can almost hear the slogans chisel themselves: utility instead of vanity, stone instead of illusion, a theater more honest because its tricks are visible. Follow the money, because Rome always does. Spoils from the Judean War, coin, bullion, statues, the famous temple treasures marched through the streets in Titus's triumph, are reckoned among the purse strings that cinch this project tight. You might have walked past the Arch of Titus and seen the menorah in relief, elegant and heavy, a ledger carved as triumph. Add to that the tax machinery that keeps emperors awake, new levies, old rents, and the quiet efficiencies of an empire-sized supply chain, and you have a building fund large enough to teach marble about humility. Mainstream fact, steady as a column drum, Vespasian begins the amphitheater. Titus dedicates it in ADC with a spree of festivities. Domitian finishes the substructures and adds the underworld of lifts and corridors, the hypogeum, that makes animals appear like opinions. Suddenly, and from the wrong angle, you enter through arithmetic disguised as arches. The exterior rings of Travertine rise in elegant tiers. Tuscan, your eye calls a Doric, on the ground, Ionic above, Corinthian crowns on top. Pilasters and engaged columns shaping the facade into a grammar lesson. But it's the numbers behind the stone that keep the crowd civil. Some 80 entrances in total, most scholars count, 76 of them public and numbered, the remaining 4 reserved for VIP logistics. 1 for the emperor, 1 perhaps for the Pampa, 2 that lead where decisions live. Your clay ticket, tessera, stamped with section and stair, becomes a compass. You climb ramps and walkways that fork and braid so cleverly that you arrive in your wedge of the sky without having argued with a stranger's elbow more than politeness requires. Light joke 1. A fresh arrival asks if vomitoria means what it sounds like. The usher smiles thinly and says, "Only metaphorically, we prefer you keep your lunch." Light joke 2. An engineer brags the building can empty in minutes. A vendor grumbles that it fills with bad spenders even faster. Light joke 3. A senator complains his box lacks shade. A sailor from Misenum tugs a rope and produces a cloud. Look up for a lesson in fabric and physics. The Valerium, a vast awning sail, unfurls and wedges from masts set into the cornice. Sailors from the fleet at Misenum run the lines. Who else knows about wind, canvas, and men who shout contradictory orders? And the whole contrivance shades a summer crowd while letting smoke and spectacle drift out through the eye of the sky. Historians still argue whether the awning covered the entire ellipse or only a generous portion, whether wind loads allowed full deployment often, and how many masts and anchor points the topmost ring concealed. Reconstructions multiply like gulls, and the only certain thing is that on the right day you smell the sea in a piece of inland sky. Now skin the seating, which is politics in stone. The cavia rises in three main belts, the IMA media, summa, stepped by social rank. Closest to the sand sit senators on marble benches with names carved into comfort. Above them equestrians, then the citizen mass. Then at the frail top, wooden bleachers for women, except vestals with their dignified front row perch, and the very poor. Stairways slice the tiers into wedges, cunei. Each wedge owns its own stair and vomitorium. Everyone sees without tripping over anyone else's boasts. The seating plan doesn't just mirror society, it teaches it, gently, session by session, how order should feel under the thighs. The arena itself is a careful paradox, simple to see, fantastically complicated to run. The floor is timber, boarded tight and banked with layers of sand that swallow footprints and, when necessary, narratives. Beneath lies the hypogeum, a honeycomb of corridors, cells, elevators, capstans, and pulleys. Trapdoors bloom on queues, cages rise on human muscle-turning winches, scenery pieces, painted rocks, artificial groves, appear like rumors. Domitian's additions make the Colosseum a machine of revelations. The empire doesn't conjure, it schedules. Quirky tidbit. Stagehands rig perfumed water into sprinklers so the air smells of saffron at high points. The famous Sparcio sometimes adds petals, sometimes coin. You learn to hold your breath at the right moment and pretend it's piety, not timing. Water whispers up from drains that remember the lake. Culverts ring the amphitheater, carrying runoff and wash water into the Cloaca Maxima's friendlier arms. Stone clampholes stud the blocks where iron once stitched travertine together. If you walked the outer arcades centuries from now, you'd see pockmarks where later builders borrowed those clamps to nail other dreams. Fires and earthquakes teach the ribs new songs across centuries. Medieval masons turned fallen marble into churches that pray with recycled adjectives. But in your present moment the joints are tight, the mortar smug, the stairs confident. Historians still argue whether early spectacles included staged naval battles, flooding the arena for Naumachii. Some ancient writers imply it, others hint amphitheaters without hypogeum were briefly turned to pools. Engineers scowl at the logistics of sealing the substructures while preserving structural sanity. The safer compromise. The Colosseum's earliest years may have hosted shallow stagings and dramatic water displays, while the Grand Basin Naumachii raged in dedicated basins elsewhere. What isn't debated, once the hypogeum is in place, the arena isn't a lake again, it's a stage with trapdoors and patience. You trace the materials like a builder's rosary, travertine from Tiber for the outer skeleton, tufa and brick for the innards where weight can be coaxed instead of commanded, Roman concrete, aggregate and lime that sets underwater, poured into vaults that teach arches to multiply. Each bay is a lesson in redundancy. Each corridor teaches airflow how to be polite. Tickets route people to the precise latrine count the quartermaster insists on. Fountain basins near exits keep tempers hydrated. Hawkers circulate with nuts, dates, and vinegar water because crowds without snacks are uprisings in rehearsal. Propaganda drapes the whole like a fine cloak. The Flavians need to rename Rome after the chaos of 69 C. Nothing says, "We are your fathers now," like a building that seats your entire quarrel with yesterday. Dedication inscriptions, the big bronze ones long since lost to plunder, have a voice you can hear. The Emperor Vespasian, and then Titus, built for the people. The Colossus of Nero, reworked with a sun crown to resemble Sol, stands nearby, a rebaptized giant that teaches how power recycles grace. Coin issues show the amphitheater's arches on tiny discs that jingle in a vendor's tray. Portable monuments for pockets that don't own marble. Light joke 4. A magistrate boasts the building emptied in 10 minutes during a drill. A spectator says his street empties in 5 when the landlord appears. Light joke 5. A sailor complains the velarium ropes tangle like politics. The foreman says that's why they hired sailors. Light joke 6. A child asks why the seating is so high. His grandmother says it's to keep vendors honest. The cleverness isn't only for crowds, it's for control. The Emperor's box opens directly onto protected corridors. Guard posts command crossings. The podium's balustrade, hip-high marble, keeps beasts and bad luck from climbing into privilege. Under the seating, storage alcoves hold scenery and improvised miracles. Down in the hypogeum, marks scratched on pillars, numbers, arrows, a crude fish, are the stage manager's gospel. When the Pampa enters, musicians, priests, victims for sacrifice, gladiators in gear that turns light into desire, the building breathes with them. Sound rises through the ellipse, curls under the awning, and returns as a single addictive weather, applause. Mainstream anchor again. Because senses can lie, capacity estimates range from 50,000 to more than 70,000. The arena measures roughly 83 by 48 meters. The facade stands about 48 to 50 meters high at dedication. Sailors of the classis missinensis are attested as awning crews. Domitian's hypogeum includes dozens of lift shafts worked by capstans, seating tiers stratified by law, exits, vomitoria. Do indeed allow rapid egress. Ancient authors brag, modern experiments in reconstruction nod. Historians still argue. The exact seat allocations, how many for equestrians, how strictly enforced for women beyond vestals, how much flexibility for visiting delegations, and the precise sequence of construction phases, which parts rose under Vespasian versus Titus versus Domitian. They also argue whether the Summa Cavia's wooden bleachers were present from the start or added as appetite grew. Stones speak, but even stones hedge. You feel, as you lean on a travertine pier and let the crowd flow around you, how architecture turns ritual into routine. Funeral duty became festival. Festival became policy. Policy now wears a skeleton of ramps and ratios. The Colosseum sells safety as much as blood, safe entrances, safe exits, safe distances between poor and powerful, and converts that safety into affection for the dynasty that manages it. The Flavians do not simply give you games, they give you proof that Rome can arrange itself. The sand below waits for the day's program, from morning hunts to midday penalties to afternoon duels. But you're still looking up, at the way thousands of bodies become polite when a building suggests it. In a city where streets argue, the amphitheater settles. And on a site where one man's lake used to flatter one man's reflection, a crowd now practices the virtues of finding a seat, holding a ticket, and exiting without incident. You suspect the gods approve, you're certain the engineers do. You arrive early because the program begins before the sun decides on an attitude. The Pampa has already marshaled beyond the arches, musicians polishing their brassy vowels, priests fussing with incense that makes even the stones smell devout, officials checking lists with the pained dignity of men who love order but live in Rome. The procession enters like a thesis, images of gods, the emperor's imago, banners naming the sponsor, editor, then the performers themselves, beast fighters and gladiators in parade gear that flatters the smith. You watch faces, some are calm, some already fighting air. One Retiarius doffs his gallerus in a mock bow to the crowd, part charm, part insurance with nemesis. The sand tastes the first footfalls and remembers. Morning belongs to teeth and choreography. Venations, beast hunts, open the show, because Romans prefer coffee with spectacle. The arena floor is dressed like a stage play of Africa imagined, scrubby trees hauled up through trapdoors, painted rock faces, A fake stream that fools no one and pleases everyone. Bestiarii enter in crested caps and lightly armored torsos, armed with spears, darts, sometimes with nothing more than nerve and a partner who knows where not to stand. Lions prowl out of the hypogeum in a slow, practiced indignation. Leopards streak like arguments. Boars arrive with the confidence of things that never read scripts. Sometimes it's single combat, sometimes a choreographed drive with nets and pitfalls, sometimes a condemned criminal costumed as mythic villain to be hunted, with theater and an unhappy ending. Mainstream fact to peg like a tent. Literary sources, Martial, Seneca, Cassius Dio, and amphitheater mosaics attest to mourning venations with imported animals. Lions, panthers, bears, boars, even ostriches. Conducted by trained bestiarii and staged with scenery, trapdoors, and ingenious lifts from the hypogeum. The Colosseum, once the mission completes its understage machinery, becomes a backstage miracle factory. Capstans hoist cages. Handlers cue appearances with chalk marks and curses. The floor above pretends everything is simple. Between acts the building breathes logistics. A sparsio, scattering, of gifts floats from officials, tokens for food, scented water, sometimes petals that land on shoulders like friendly rumors. Vendors circulate with dates, nuts, vinegar water, and sausages whose provenance you decide not to discuss. Children count the masts of the velarium as sailors tug shade into place. Old soldiers critique trapdoor timing the way bakers critique crusts. A boy copies the name of his favorite mirmillo on a wax tablet. His mother copies the seating number so he does not copy a stranger. Midday sharpens its teeth. The Meridianum Spectaculum, noon show, belongs to penalties and myth made literal. Condemned criminals, the Noxii, appear as actors in a script with one ending. A man dressed as Orpheus mauled by beasts when his song fails. A Daedalus with wax wings who discovers gravity is also imperial. A Laurealus robbed on a stage cross and then crucified, according to the program's particular zeal. Sometimes it's execution by sword in pairs, staged as a grim parody of the afternoon duels. Sometimes a more bureaucratic hurry of death. The crowd eats. The crowd judges. The crowd learns the lesson the editor paid to teach. The state orders the world, even at lunch. Historians still argue whether the noon slot was always dominated by executions everywhere or whether local tastes and particular editors softened or sharpened the menu. Some moralists complain of obscene cruelty, others of boredom. Archaeological programs suggest wide variation. They also debate how often myths were staged with elaborate sets versus simple costume and caption. The safe sentence is that noon reliably carried legal theater, the hour when the law put on a mask and called it allegory. Afternoon is the headline, Munera, the pairs you came to see. After a sweep and a fresh rake, the sand gleams like a promise. The referees, the summa rudis and his assistant, step out with long batons that point, separate, and forbid. A trumpeter gives the first curl, the gate lifts, and the type versus type grammar of the amphitheater begins to conjugate. A broad-shouldered mirmillo with crested helm and heavy scutum faces a nimble retiarius, helmetless, with trident, net, and armguard. A thraex with small square shield and curved sicca meets a hoplomachus with spear and round shield. A secutor, smooth-domed and streamlined to ignore the retiarius's trident prongs, chases and corners like a thesis intent on its conclusion. You've seen the wood and wicker version in the ludus. Now the iron sings. Light joke 1. A seller of cushions claims the best seats track the sun. A sailor suggests they track the shade. Light joke 2. A boy shouts suggestions at the retiarius. His grandmother says the trident doesn't hear children. Light joke 3. A senator declares he always favors the underdog. His neighbor replies, "Then you love everyone after 3 minutes." The fight is not a brawl, it's a conversation with rules. No stabbing fallen men unless the referee permits. No crowding the rail. No pretending you didn't hear the baton rap the rim of your shield. Surrender, when it comes, is a choreography, a raised finger, a dropped weapon, the kneel and extended neck many mosaics favor, though reality offers variations. The editor, sponsor, and judge watches. The audience roars. The thumb signal lives in the messy space between modern cliché and ancient variety. Historians still argue whether police verso meant thumb up, down, or a turn/thumbs press gesture. Iconography is coy, texts are elliptical, and a lot of film posters are certain. What is less arguable? The editors will prevails. The crowd persuades. Mercy, missio, is common enough that victors expect it when skill shines and contracts smile. Mainstream anchor, short and sharp. A victorious gladiator receives the palm branch and sometimes a corona or cash. Repeated success can lead to the wooden sword, rudis, manumission. The right to retire free or to continue as a celebrity trainer or exhibition fighter. Inscriptions list win. Lost records. Some fighters die young. Others accumulate dozens of bouts. A stat line that suggests most matches end in surrender or missio, not death. The mortality is real. The fatality rate per fight is lower than legend when a smart editor guards his investment, and a skilled man guards his breath. Between bouts, the arena runs a ballet of maintenance. Attendants rake blood into calm patterns. A slave with a sponge on a stick tidies the stains with the resigned professionalism of a man who knows history will not give him a footnote. Trapdoors yaw open to swallow scenery and indignities. The Sparcio slips coins to the cheap seats. A troupe performs a comic interlude about Hercules and accounting. The Valerium snaps as a gust reminds everyone who actually owns the sky. Quirky tidbit. Souvenir culture thrives. Oil flasks stamped with gladiator names, terracotta cups with caricatured helms, medallions that let a fan declare allegiance. Graffiti scribbles on walls near the Ludi read like proto-sport statistics. Crescents, Secutor, 1/6 of 9. Celadus, the girl's heartthrob. Another. Bookmakers too discreet to exist officially nonetheless take whispered bets. The Summa Rudis pretends not to notice, and is paid not to notice. The card deepens into specialty bouts and star turns. A pair of endobati, visor-closed fighters who rely on luck and laughter, blunder nobly to amuse. Two charioteers dismount for a Greco-Roman novelty match that is neither Greek nor Roman but entirely entertaining. A star Retiarius meets a star Secutor with pageantry so slick you can taste the contracts. The editor saves the marquee duel for last light, when shadows lengthen and the crowd's noise rises into something suspiciously like prayer. A pause, a salute, Ave, editor, not morituri te salutant, because that famous line belongs to a single river pageant elsewhere, and the sand decides that reputation is heavy but steel is heavier. Historians still argue. Program order by era and city. How rigid the morning/noon/afternoon scheme was. How often editors tinkered to please local tastes. Whether executions always sat at noon or sometimes bled into morning or were tucked away to keep afternoons pure. They also debate the ratio of elite star fights to journeyman bouts on a typical day. The inscriptions we have skew toward careers worth boasting about. Safe answer, variety plus rhythm. Hunt, justice, duel, carried the crowd across hours like a well-paced narrative. By dusk, you are full of sand, smoke, and opinions you will deny tomorrow. The last victor holds a palm under the awning's violet edge. The defeated, dead, wounded, or reprieved, are carried or helped away through the same trapdoors that taught beasts to arrive on time. The editor smiles the precise smile of a man who bought mood successfully. The crowd flows out through numbered vomitoria in a demonstration that order can empty as quickly as it filled. Vendors pack up. Sailors lower canvas. The hypogeum exhales a day's secrets into corridors that, for once, are cool. Light joke 4. A child waves a palm so vigorously he pokes a senator. The mother apologizes and takes the leaf. For soup. Light joke 5. A sailor says the velarium makes shade. A philosopher says it makes allegory. The usher says it makes closing time. Light joke 6. A vendor insists his sausages are famous. A legionary says so is dysentery. You step onto the evening street and catch a last glance through an arch. The arena floor already raked. A single attendant lifting a lost tridentine from the sand like a relic. Tomorrow will bring a new card, new posters chalked on walls, new coins with arches stamped on them, new arguments about mercy and courage and whether a net is fair. The program holds because it's a ritual that learned to be entertainment without forgetting it was a ritual. Morning hunts give you fear and skill, noon gives you law and myth, afternoon gives you talent and decision. Wrapped around all three, a building that teaches a city to be a crowd and a crowd to be Rome. You wake to the sound of wood smacking wood, a tidy thunder that means breakfast has opinions about your day. The training yard, a rectangle of sun and sand ringed by galleries, has already started its chorus. Rudis, wooden sword, thudding into the Paulus post, shields kissing with the polite aggression of colleagues, a Lanista's clap chopping time into obedience. You live in the Ludus, the school that turns strangers into stylized dangers, and the rules hang in the air like laundry: show up, shape up, shut up, and outlast the other fellow's plan. First, the oath, because the Ludus is as much contract as it is courtyard. You said the words when you signed your body over, Yuri, then Sirai, Verberari Feroke Nekari, to be burned, bound, beaten, and if it comes to it, killed by the sword. Consent in Latin sounds calmer than it feels. For some here, consent was not consulted, enslaved, condemned, or sold. For others, it arrived with arithmetic, octorati, free men who chose the arena for pay, bonus, and the strange promise of fans who will chant your name like a prayer and then go home to soup. Your contract, Lex Gladiatoria, itemizes fees, fines, days of rest, days you will wish were rest, the price of your skin if you damage it foolishly, and what cut the Lanista takes when you win. You are, in short, both warrior and ledger. Mainstream fact, solid enough to lean on between drills. Rome had state-recognized training schools, including the great Ludus Magnus built just east of the Colosseum under Domitian, with an oval practice arena and an underground corridor that led straight into the amphitheater. Inscriptions name Lanisti, doctors attached to schools, and trainers for specific fighting styles. The Ludus Magnus Foundation still showed the shape of the courtyard. Ancient writers like Juvenal and Galen drop details that smell of sweat and grain. Your morning is a choreography the body learns faster than pride admits. Stretch the shoulders until yesterday's choices creak. Footwork drills along the sanded track, short steps, sudden pivots, the dance that makes heavy armor feel like an argument you will win. You practice with weights. The root is heavier than iron to turn real steel into relief. A wicker shield thicker than today's board to train wrists that won't wobble under the afternoon glare. The Paulus, a stubborn post set at man height, absorbs 100 thrusts while the trainer counts in a voice that could season meat. Keep the elbow close, eyes quiet, breathe like you mean to be here tomorrow. Styles divide the yard into little islands of obsession. Over there, Murmillos with big scuta and crested helmets rehearse the patient push and puncture that frustrates poets. To their right, Threses practice lashing arcs with the Sicca, their small square shields flashing like punctuation. Secutors jog tight circles, helms smooth as river stones, learning how to herd a retiarius into nets of wall and decision. And the Retiarii, bareheaded, Gallerus on the left shoulder, flick nets with a fisherman's disdain and a bullfighter's timing, trident held like an opinion nobody asked for but everyone must now consider. The doctors, coaches, walk through each island correcting angles, posture, timing, and the bad habits fear invents. Light joke 1, A Murmillo says the Retiarius's helmet must be invisible. The Retiarius replies that visibility is for men who enjoy migraines. Light joke 2, the Lanista announces a new diet, and a chorus groans louder than the morning horn. Proof that fear of cabbage outvotes fear of lions. Light joke 3, a doctor confiscates a trainee's lucky charm, which turns out to be a stolen kitchen ladle. He returns it with a lecture on luck and soup. Food is a training tool disguised as comfort. The Ludus kitchen ladles out barley porridge thick enough to slow bad decisions, beans that walk the line between protein and penance, dried fruit when coin and season flirt, and oil for calories and shine. You hear the nickname in whispers and on tablets. Horderii. Barley men. Galen and modern bones conspire on this point. Gladiators favored a high plant diet and sometimes drank a tonic of plant ash, yes, ash, dissolved in water or vinegar, a calcium-rich brew to harden bones abused by daily arithmetic. Quirky tidbit. The ash drink tastes like a dare, but men swallow it with the same expression they wear under new boots. Grim hope. Historians still argue whether the diet was vegetarian by philosophy or vegetable-heavy by budget and recovery needs. Isotope studies of bones from Ephesus and other sites suggest lots of grains and legumes. Literary scolds sneer that barley is for horses. Fans swear their favorites ate meat between adoring glances. The safest truth is practical. Bulk calories that repair. With meat when available, oil whenever the purse smiles, and ash water because a medicus with statistics beat a medicus with taste buds. Discipline is the Ludus's second cook. The Lanista, part impresario, part drill sergeant, part accountant, keeps a little stick called schedule and a bigger one called consequences. Miss a drill, you pay in lashes or in coin. Show up sloppy, you carry a sandbag until sloppiness makes sense. The doctors specialize. A one-eyed veteran who turns your shield arm into grammar. A lean Thracian who teaches how to make the sickest curve write sentences on a tall man's thigh. A retired Retiarius with a net folded like a sermon. They clap for clean technique louder than for bravado. Your future depends on boring excellence more than on exciting mistakes. Injuries aren't misfortunes, they're curriculum. The medicus and capsarii, orderlies, run a side business in caution, scrapes cleaned with wine, stitches closed with needles that don't care about your schedule, liniments rubbed until men hiss and gratitude hides behind sarcasm. Wooden practice blades, wicker shields, and blunted tridents keep the worst accidents temporary, but the yard still writes reminders on shins and ribs. Rest days exist and are enforced. No one earns coin on an exhibition if both fighters limp. Mainstream aside, neat as a bandage, contemporary medical authors remark on gladiator care. Galen famously served as a physician to the gladiators in Pergamum, leaving notes on diet, bleeding, and the management of wounds. Inscriptions from Lydia mention staff medics. Wooden practice weapons and Paulus training are standard descriptions and sources from juvenile to later antiquarian writers. The rudis doubles as the symbolic wooden sword of manumission when retirement finally comes. Contracts shape everything from calluses to bedtime. The Lanista rents pairs to editors who book the day's card. Your record, wins, losses, missio, reprieves, is both resume and ransom note. A good performance raises your fee. A messy one raises your stitches. The Ludus takes its cut for housing, food, training, medical care, and the privilege of being told when to wake, when to eat, when to pretend not to hear the snoring two bunks over. If you volunteer, Octoratus, your contract might include a signing bonus and a term. If you're enslaved, your buyout is a number with a horizon. Everyone counts. Historians still argue the proportion of volunteers versus enslaved fighters in different eras and regions. Inscriptions celebrate Octorati as daring professionals. Moralists spit and call them degraded citizens. Court records show condemned men trained quickly and thrown poorly to the sand. The balance shifts with economics and politics. What doesn't shift is the school's indifference. Bodies in, box office out. Afternoons bring controlled chaos. Sparring with styled pairs chosen to irritate. Foot races in gear to teach lungs manners. Ladder drills to harden ankles. Shield push contests where 3 breaths decide whether your lower back will hate you in 20 years. The lanista likes to stage mock, crowd pressure, drills, other trainees stomping and yelling while you try to hear the doctor's cues. Because performing under noise is half the job. There are also classroom moments. A trainer sketches a Colosseum plan in charcoal, marks the gate you'll use, the corner where the editor sits, the blind spot where a nervous man looks away just before he loses. Light joke 4. A veteran tells you to name your shield. You say, "Home." He nods like a priest. Light joke 5. The cook says today's stew is Numidian style. You ask what that means. He says, "Less salt, more imagination." Light joke 6. A trainee tries the Gladiators net at lunch and snares the bread cart. The lanista finds him 1 loaf and a lecture on appropriate contexts. Rest doesn't mean idle. You rub oil into leather until the straps remember kindness. You polish helm bronze until your face looks like ambition. You carve a tiny charm into a belt fitting. A fish, a palm, a rude word, superstition smuggled into gleam. Some men keep tiny altars, Nemesis, Hercules, sometimes Venus with a wink nobody admits to, in a corner where the dust behaves. Others practice signatures for the day a fan will ask to see your name on a shard of pottery. The ludus is a factory for skill, yes. It also mass-produces hope. Quirky tidbit 2. Schools sometimes staged open house exhibitions, controlled bouts for paying spectators, to advertise talent and soothe nerves before the big day. Another, graffiti near barracks record rivalries and crushes. Celidus Suspirium Polarum. Celidus, the girl's sigh, gets copied more often than the lanista approves, which tells you everything you need to know about marketing. At night, the yard exhales and the dormitory inhales. Snores compete with whispered prayers. Dice click in corners where luck pretends to be a business plan. A trainer limps past with the stubborn gait of old victories. You lie on your pallet, ribs humming with useful pain, and rehearse footwork in your head until sleep mistakes you for a disciplined thought. Tomorrow promises the same curriculum with different jokes. Ash water tonic, Paulus cuts, net drills, shield shoves, contracts counted, dreams edited. The truth of the ludus settles like evening dust. This is not merely a place that prepares you to die well. It is a place that teaches you how not to die yet. Ritual meets routine here. Myth meets muscle memory. Economy meets appetite. You are being taught a role in a civic theater that needs you believable and, ideally, reusable. The lanista's ledger does not love tragedy. Your body, properly trained, can often refuse it. In the morning you will touch the rudis again and find it a little lighter. That is the point. Make the right move easier than the wrong one, and let the crowd call it courage. By now the yard has sorted itself into dialects of danger, and you can read a man's grammar by his silhouette. Big board and fish crest? Murmillo. Smooth dome and narrow eye slits, chasing the man with the fishing gear? Secutor. Curved blade and high greaves, shield the size of a bad idea? Thrakes. Spear and round shield with a taste for Greek nostalgia? Hoplomachus. Bare head, shoulder guard like a little bronze cliff, net and trident? The crowd's love-hate letter, the Gladiators. Each style is a promise to the audience, a contract with the editor, and a daily to-do list for your joints. Start with the neighborhood watch of heavy kit. The murmillo carries a tall, curved scutum, cousin to the legionary board, though trimmed for the sand, and a short sword gladius, plus a helmet with high crest and a face grill that turns shouting into philosophy. One greave on the left leg, a right arm wrapped in manica, segmented guard, and a broad belt plate that pretends to be modest. His tactic is patient geometry. Angle the wall, step the half pace, jab under the rim, repeat until the other man writes a regrettable sentence. Pair him with the Retiarius and you get Rome's favorite contrast, iron turtle meets angry fisherman, or with the Thraex for a duel of edges and timing. The Secutor exists to find the Retiarius and remove his right to improvise. Helmet smooth as an oiled pebble, small round eye holes that ignore trident prongs, tall scutum again, gladius again, and the same manica/greave ensemble. He's a pressure cooker, straight line, short bursts, corner the net man against rail or post, don't let the net reset the conversation. When the Retiarius flings lead-weighted mesh, yes, the net isn't a bedsheet. It's edged with little opinions, the Secutor shields high, steps through, and pretends distance never existed. If he slows, he drowns. If he rushes, he trips. The referee's baton is there to keep dignity from becoming demolition. Slide over to the Thraex, the Thracian, with that jaunty small parmula, square shield, tall greaves that bite the calves, and the Sicca, a short, inward curving blade designed to reach around a big shield's rim like a gossip who knows side doors. Helmet crests sometimes sprout a griffin or palmet, a little theater that says, foreign but fashionable. A Thraex snaps at angles, feints for the knee, then harvests the exposed thigh or flank when a heavy shield forgets it has edges. Pairings with Murmillo or Hoplomachus chant the old light and sharp versus heavy and stable chorus. The crowd hums along because it knows the tune. Hoplomachus, armed like a hoplite, remembers someone else's Bronze Age with a round shield and a thrusting spear, often carrying a backup short sword for when honor turns into moment. He uses point pressure, probe, reel the other man into a false step, then jab where the armor is a rumor. He's frequently set against the Murmillo or Thraex to right. Greek versus other Greek. In Sand, which Rome adores, nostalgia with new blood. Now the Retiarius, the lightning rod. No helmet, just a headband and confidence. Left shoulder under a tall gallerus that could moonlight as a little parapet. Right arm braced by manica. Trident in hand, dagger at hip. Net open like a sail that wants a story. Tactics are patience and punctuation. Threaten with the net to shape the other man's choices. Jab with the trident to keep him honest. If the net lands, jerk and close. If it misses, gather with a practiced scoop and move. The Retiarius fights the crowd as well as the opponent. Half will cheer, half will hiss, all will remember. Light joke 1. The Retiarius says he fishes. The Secutor says he farms. You say you prefer soup. Add the provocator, the challenger, breastplate, pectorali, medium shield, helmet with straightforward face guard, gladius. A more symmetrical duel often pitting provocator against provocator to keep pairings tidy and legal. Equipment levels must balance to satisfy the referees and the sponsors' lawyers. The Ikes fights on horseback to open a program, lance and round shield for a few elegant passes, then dismount to finish with short swords, because horses don't sign contracts. There's the Dimacharius with 2 blades and twice the opportunities to drop one, the Esidarius, chariot fighter, in occasional novelty bouts that make engineers squint, and the Andabatus, visor shut tight and fate-appointed chaperone, comedy's favorite way to teach humility. Mainstream fact you can tie to mosaics and inscriptions, the tight matchups, are consistent on art like the Zlatan mosaic, Libya, the Borghese and Nennig mosaics, and in epigraphic records listing victors by type. Helmets with face grills, high crests, and stylized emblems survive in museums. Manichae and greaves are attested in finds and reliefs. Nets with lead sinkers are described and sometimes depicted. Referees, summa rudis and assistant, hold long batons and occasionally wear broad-brimmed hats so a swinging sword learns manners. Inscriptions also record missio, reprieve, symbols and the rudis, wooden sword, awarded upon manumission. Historians still argue whether Certain flamboyant types, like the Dimachurus or scissor, the blade embracer man sometimes described in later sources, were common in the Colosseum or more local flavors that modern imagination has overfed. They also argue how standardized gear weights were. Some helmets are boat anchors, others manageable, and what proportion of fighters were left-handed. Reliefs hint at some, and contracts may have treasured them for novelty. Gear is theater and therapy. Helmets are bronze or iron with face grills that turn eyes into slots and sound into bass. Visibility narrows until you learn to read feet and shoulders more than faces. The manica, segmented arm guard, keeps forearms from becoming biographies. The galleries for the radiarius makes a wonderful clang when a trident prong or sword glance sings off it, which the audience loves because music. Greaves, ochre climb high on Thraci's legs because small shields leave shins open to ambition. Belts flare into wide bronze plates that flatten midriffs and parade their owner's sponsor's purse. Sand sticks to oiled skin, not to bronze. You learn to love the way glare becomes camouflage. Light joke 2. The Murmillo claims his crest makes him taller. The Radiarius says it makes him easier to find. Light joke 3. A Thrax polishes his greaves until he sees a future. The Hoplomachus says my spear can reach that far too. Weapons 2. Speak dialects. The Gladius is a short essay on certainty. Stab, don't scribble. The Sika's inward curve is a loophole with teeth. The trident is reach and rhythm. Too slow and you knit the air. Just right and you pin a shield to a story. The net reedy is the most Roman of paradoxes, chaotic and ignorant hands, clockwork and trained ones. In practice yards, nets have bright thread marks to teach grip. In the arena they're plain, sometimes with a drawstring at the rim so a deft pull tightens misery. Referees watch for entanglements that turn skill into hazard. You will see the baton tap to pause and disentangle if theater threatens to become accident. Mainstream anchor, small and sharp, multiple sources, marshals the spectaculous, mosaics, reliefs from Pompeii and Capua, attest to the common pairs, Murmillo v. Thrax/Hoplomachus, Secutor v. Radiarius, Provocator v. Provocator, and to the iconography of victory, palm, crown, and surrender gestures, raised finger, dropped shield. Helmets from Pompeii, Herculaneum, and later finds show standardized types with lavish decoration, sometimes silvered or tinned to sparkle. Show business is not shy. Tactics flow from kit. Heavy shield fighters win by economy. Short footwork, shield angling that eats light blades, pressure to the rail. Light shield fighters win by tempo. Attack the legs, vanish sideways, draw a chase, punish the turn. Bresciarii win by real estate. Control distance with jabs, threaten net casts to move the other man into a corner, strike when breath stutters. Provocateurs, matched evenly, play chess with stabs. Equites with the crowd with symmetry and good hair. Referees exist to keep this dance inside offensive rules. No stabbing after surrender. No exploiting armor malfunctions. Step back on the bat and rap. Resume on the handcut that says, yes, the crowd may breathe now. Historians still argue whether kill rates per bout were in single digits or bloodier in certain eras. Inscriptions with long careers, dozens of fights, argue for frequent missio and survival, while moralists' rants argue for oceans of gore. The balance likely shifts with editor, audience, and economics. Fighters are investments. Even emperors mostly prefer talented men alive for the next birthday. Quirky tidbit. Stage names brand you as much as helmets do. Hilaris, Crescens, Calamus, Punna, proud, or provincial, and appear on oil flasks and cups. Some helmets bear stamped ownership marks from the ludus. A missing visor returned with a fine tells a story only the quartermaster laughs at. Another curiosity. Some tridents have barbed prongs that complicate removal in practice but thrill a crowd when a crest snags with a flourish. The Summa Rudis earns his wages disentangling steel from ego. Maintenance is half the match. You spend evenings burnishing bronze, checking leather ties, and weighing the net's edge weights with thumb and superstition. Too light, it flutters. Too heavy, it drops short. The medicus inspects padding inside helmets because concussions write poems no one wants to memorize. The lanista minds pairings so style complements style. Novelty sells only if it respects the learned grammar. A Dimachorus might appear against a scissor to make a painting. The regular card still leans on the old couplets that never get stale. Light joke 4. The Summa Rudis says his baton is the lightest weapon with the heaviest consequence. You nod and avoid testing mass. Light joke 5. The Ikez asks if horses count as fans. The vendor says only if they buy sausages. Light joke 6. The provocator measures the sand with his toes and claims it's deeper on his side. The Thraex replies the gods read contracts. Mainstream aside to balance the ledger. The rudis awarded on retirement is not only a prop but a legal token. Freedom for the enslaved fighter, honorarium for the volunteer. Records show reparum. Lists of fights, carved on tombs with WLM, missus, tallies. Manumitted veterans often return as trainers, their rudis hung above a doorway like a diploma that still enjoys starting conversations. Historians still argue how much theatrical scripting bled into late antique bouts. Were some outcomes pre-agreed for starters? Did certain emperors demand safe spectaculars? Sources accuse, others defend. The Sand says both could be true depending on the day and the editor's nerves. They also gnaw the bone of regional variation. Africa likes more beastwork braided into duels. The East likes showier decor. Rome pretends to be the standard while borrowing everyone's best. By lantern light. The equipment room looks like a museum of intentions. Crested helms lined up like silent roosters, nets coiled like patient serpents, tridents stacked with prongs pointing down in polite menace, shields leaning in a gossiping arc. You run a finger along a visor's grill and think about how each slit edits the world, how each greave invites its own target, how each blade curves around a philosophy. The crowd will see types. You must be a person inside the type who moves like he belongs there. Tomorrow, the Sand will ask the only question it knows. Did your kit and craft make the right thing easier than the wrong thing? You oil the manica, hang the net, and answer with a yawn. You step onto the practice sand and rehearse gestures that matter more than strength. The way your blade presents, the angle your chin adopts when you salute, the distance between kneel and pride. The amphitheater is a court with different wigs. Ritual keeps fights from turning into riots and turns danger into a grammar the crowd can read. Before the gate rises, you and your opponent touch weapons to the referee's baton. The Summa Rudis holds it level like a magistrate's calm, and the sand becomes a contract. The salute is the first sentence. You face the editor's podium. Raise the right hand or the weapon, not the famous "We who are about to die" line, which belongs to another watery pageant and a poet's appetite, and you mark yourself present for rules as much as for spectacle. The referees, Summa Rudis and Secunda Rudis, stand apart, eyes on footwork, not faces. Their long rods are punctuation, tapping a shield rim to separate, slicing the air to resume, crossing to forbid. They are not there to decide who is beautiful. They are there to decide when a beautiful move becomes illegal. Boundaries blink in and out depending on today's scenery. The chalk line near the rail is polite fiction. You may use every grain of sand, but not the audience's sandals. Climbing the barrier to avoid a corner trap is creative. Staying on it like a nervous cat is refusal. The rudis's baton fixes that with a tap and a gesture toward the middle that means, back to the argument. Eyes follow the baton because the baton is the law's loudest whisper. Pairings obey a logic fans could recite in their sleep. Style meets counterstyle so no one complains the dice were loaded. Rediarius secutor, Murmillo Thraex, Hoplomachus Thraex, Provocator. Gear parity matters. heavy to heavy, light to light, unless novelty is the point, and the editor warned the summa rudis to be especially watchful. Illegal shortcuts are the same in every dialect. No deliberately gouging through a visor grill. No heel-hooking an opponent into the rail where the helmet becomes a prison. No stabbing a man who has clearly yielded. If the helmet's tie snaps and the visor drops, the referee's cross-cut of the baton freezes the world. Attendants rush to retie while the crowd shifts from blood to etiquette with impressive speed. Surrender is choreography drilled until pride can perform it. The sign is usually the raised finger, ad digitum, your hand lifted to ask for missio, the reprieve. Sometimes it's a dropped weapon and a kneel, sometimes a hand on the thigh and a look to the summa rudis. The editor's decision follows a breath later. A flat palm or turned thumb or covered fist. Iconography and text disagree, the crowd translates anyway. Mercy isn't kindness alone, it's accounting. If the fight was skillful, if contracts smile, if the editor wants the city to talk about his good sense at dinner, the baton will angle to the side and you will be led away to stitches instead of statistics. Mainstream fact you can trust with a palm on the rail. Referees are visible in mosaics, Slyton, Borghese, Nenig, holding long rods. Surrender signals and missio appear in inscriptions and art, with victors receiving palm branches and sometimes crowns. The editor, editor muneris, holds the right to grant or refuse missio, but audience pressure mattered, especially in the Colosseum's theater where public mood was a policy instrument. Inscriptions with long fight records, many wins, many misses outcomes, imply that death was not the default. Rules and ritual work to preserve usable talent. Fouls were names and consequences. A deliberate groin jab with gloating intent earns the baton smack and a warning. Repetition may hand victory to the fouled man or restart the bout with the offender disadvantaged. Helmet off for a pass, or a forced step back while the other man chooses the angle. Grappling exists, but only the kind the referee can follow. Disarming, tripping, pinning for a legal strike. Throttling with a net cord is clever until it isn't. The baton will peck your wrist like an angry hen and remind you rope belongs around shoulders, not windpipes. A retiarius who throws his net over the rail onto a senator's lap will not fight again that day, at least not on sand. Light joke 1. The summa rudis says his baton is made of logic. You ask if it bends, he says only when editors pay well. Light joke 2. A secutor claims he never commits fouls because his helmet can't see them. The referee fines him for eloquence. Light joke 3. A vendor swears the rules forbid eating sausages during a missio decision. The usher says the gods forbid mustard on marble. The pre-fight ritual checks the day's small gods. Attendants test helmet ties and tighten greave straps. A medicus peers into your visor like a fortune teller, checking pupils for yesterday's concussion. A doctor's murmurs the same 3 points he always murmurs. Breathe, feet first, tip of the blade says hello. You touch a tiny charm stitched inside your belt. Nemesis, a palm leaf, a crude trident, because rituals are scaffolds for courage. You and your opponent exchange the ceremonial touch of weapons again, a tiny knock that says, "Let's give them a story and each other a morning." The pampa provides the day's opening rite, musicians, priests, costumed myth morsels, the editor in his box framed like a verdict, fighters processed in parade kit with gleam outpacing fear. Sacrifices at the arena altar, often to Nemesis, teach luck its place. The sand receives a libation. The crowd receives the schedule. Somewhere underfoot the hypogeum crews mark columns with chalk arrows that look like prayers from carpenters. Historians still argue whether specific hand signals meant the same thing in every city and century. Was there a universal sign language for pause, resume, advantage? Or whether each ludus and amphitheater used local dialects that the experienced quickly learned. They also argue the exact meaning of pollice verso, turned thumb up, down, sideways, shrouded thumb. Iconography is contradictory. and textual evidence is vexingly poetic. The safe middle is that the editor's visible gesture, amplified by the crowd's will and the referee's baton, determined outcomes. Painters later simplified a messy vernacular into a dramatic icon. Weapons and armor have their own rights. Before a match, the summa rudis inspects edges and prongs. Tips may be filed to fair but fatal points. This isn't a fencing sal, but no serrations, no trick barbs beyond the style's norm. Nets are checked for weight and intact drawstrings, tridents for straightness, the gladius for honest tempering, the sicca for legal curve. A broken strap mid-bout stops time for repair. A broken rule mid-bout starts an argument with a clear winner, the baton. Afterward, equipment is tallied, cleaned, and blessed in the only way that matters to leather and bronze, oil and patience. Quirky tidbit. Some Samurais wore broad-brimmed hats, depicted in mosaics, to shade their vision and make them easy to spot. The hat becomes part of the ritual costume, like the Retiarius's gallerus or the provocator's breastplate. Another, chalk tally marks scratched into the arena's wooden rails recorded about order or fouls for the crew. Archaeologists find little notches that look like nothing and may be the day's handwriting. Etiquette extends past the moment of decision. If granted missio, you rise slowly, collect your weapon only at the referee's nod, and touch the victor's shield rim with yours, a courtesy that keeps grudges in the ludus where contracts can manage them. The victor receives a palm branch, and, if the editor is feeling theatrical, a crown. He parades along the podium, saluting boxes that will talk about him at dinner. If death is ordered, the defeated is expected to meet it with a composed neck. Attendants stand ready with a mercy thrust to the heart or under the shoulder blade, quick as practiced kindness, while a flute player tries to soften the edge between theater and fact. Mainstream anchor, brief and plain, palm and crowns as tokens of victory are shown in art. The wooden sword, rudis, symbolizes manumission on retirement. Mercy thrusts are attested in literary descriptions, with attendants trained to end a scene efficiently. The arena is less chaos than ceremony. Even endings have cues. Rules borrow from religion when useful. Oaths sworn by fighters at the ludus, that hard creed you mouthed about burning and binding, echo in the arena as the social contract's sharp edge. Offerings to Nemesis pay the tax of luck in advance. A small shrine near a gate collects coins like a rational superstition. The crowd participates with its own customs, waving cloths for mercy, chanting names in meter, throwing cushions when a decision offends, ritualized outrage with safe edges. Historians still argue how much the emperor's presence warped rules. Did imperial thumbs override referees? Did certain reigns favor mercy or severity in ways that bent the book? Suetonius gossips, Dio sermonizes. The truth likely varies by emperor, editor, and day. They also debate whether some bouts were judged for points, skilled displays to a limit, rather than to surrender. A few inscriptions and anecdotes suggest exhibitions with agreed endings, proof that the ritual could wear softer shoes when politics required. You learn the smallest rite of all, the breathe before the first step. 2 counts in, 2 counts out, eyes on the other man's belt, not his eyes, because eyes beguile and belts betray. The referee lifts the baton, the horn curls a note, you move. When the baton wraps your rim to separate, you release, step back, and start again, not because you fear or favor, but because the ritual says, "Not yet." The crowd relaxes into a story it understands. You relax into rules that let skill speak louder than panic. Light joke 4. A philosopher in the cheap seats explains the ethics of mercy. A child explains the rules of trident footwork. The section applauds the child. Light joke 5. The secunda rudis drops his hat. The crowd cheers as if it were strategy. He bows and finds himself a drink. Light joke 6. The editor raises a hand for silence. A vendor raises a price for sausage. By dusk, the day's rituals have done their quiet work. They carried violence inside boundaries, taught a city how to desire and then how to dismiss, let courage be legible and cruelty be negotiated. You leave the gate with your pulse steady because the baton tapped when it should, the chant rose when it was useful. The editor remembered that mercy sells as well as doom. Back at the Ludus, the doctors will replay gestures on a dusty board. You will mime the raised finger, the pause, the resumption, until sleep edits the motions into muscle. Tomorrow, the rules will still be there. Tomorrow, the ritual will keep the sand from becoming only sand. You learn quickly that the Ludus is part gym, part workshop, part hospital that refuses to call itself one. Mornings begin with the clack of the rudis against the paulus. But before that there's a smaller sound, linen unwrapping from a clean bundle, bronze instruments breathing a little alcohol and pride, the medicus clearing his throat like a man about to edit fate. Survival here is not an accident, it's a maintenance schedule. The clinic occupies a sunlit corner off the yard, a room that smells of wine, oil, and a faint iron memory. On the shelf, scalpel handles with interchangeable blades, probes, forceps, needles with thread waxed to slide, cautery irons hung like quiet threats, small cups for cupping, and a drawer of powders that turn water into advice. The medicus taps your knuckles and says, "Open close," and you obey because he decides whether you fight today or live to fight the day clients remember. His assistants, the capsarii, named for the little medical satchels they carry, move in practice triangles. One cuts the crusted strap, one cleans, one records on a wax tablet because even pain must account for itself. Mainstream fact, steady as a stitched wound, Roman military and gladiatorial medicine was organized, staffed, and equipped. Galen famously served as physician to gladiators in Pergamum, describing diet, bleeding, wound care, and the management of fractures. Surgical kits found at sites from Pompeii to military forts, Neuss, Vindonissa, matched the bronze and iron instruments described by Celsus and Scribonius Largus: scalpels, forceps, specula, hooks, needles, and cautery tools. Honey, wine, vinegar, and resin appear as standard cleansers and dressings. Opium, henbane, and mandrake enter as sleep and mercy where cutting threatens to outshout courage. Training writes injuries in a modest hand, blisters where straps met enthusiasm, leather burn along the collarbone, shin bites from a Thraex who practiced honesty at the wrong angle. The medicus triages with a glance and a sigh. Scrapes get wine and honey, pressed under linen. Sprains get cold river water and a binding that informs ankles about adulthood. Deeper cuts get sutures with thread that will itch later like an old joke. A cracked rib buys you 3 days of humility, a wicker shield instead of wood, and the lanista's promise that complaining is not cardio. You're examined for concussion the way a horse is, eyes, gait, answers to simple questions that feel like theft. Fail, and the doctors reassign you to polishing bronze and practicing footwork without weapons while your brain remembers its job. Historians still argue whether Roman antisepsis consistently worked beyond good luck. Wine and vinegar have antimicrobial properties, honey helps seal wounds, and the army's rigid sanitation reduced infection risk. But how uniformly Lydian enforced best practices varies by purse and personality. They also debate the sophistication of anesthesia. Soporifics like opium and mandrake are attested, but dosage was imprecise. Bite the strap coexisted with sleep through it, and the patient's fame sometimes decided which. The day's second medicine is diet, measured more in ladles than in myths. The barley porridge is thick enough to slow a fall. Beans and pulses repair what vanity broke. Oil sneaks calories into quiet corners of the body. The notorious ash drink, plant ash mixed in water or vinegar, shows up again at lunch, a calcium tonic that turns sore bones into stubborn bones. It tastes like advice from a stranger, but you swallow because Galen said the men under his care healed faster, and a medicus with statistics always wins arguments in places where death, also keeps numbers. Quirky tidbit: the ash brew sometimes gets a drop of honey. For morale, which does nothing for chemistry and everything for gratitude. Light joke 1. The medicus prescribes less trident, more sleep. The Rediarius insists he can sleep with the trident. The medicus says the dormitory cannot. Light joke 2. A secutor complains the ash drink tastes like the training yard. The cook replies that's how you know it's working. Light joke 3. The Capsarius offers you a choice between a cautery and a lecture on prevention. You choose the cautery. Gear has its own clinic. In the armory, helmets line up like bronze moons, their grills checked for cracked bars, their leather liners replaced before sweat becomes salt, becomes rash, becomes absenteeism. The manicus straps are oiled, then tightened, then tested by a blunt rap because a slipping guard turns a parry into an apology. Nets get examined for split drawstrings and missing weights. Tridents get trued. Prongs measured for legality. No cheating barbs today, not unless the editor wants fines. Shields are refaced when the wicker or wood shows more history than is fashionable. The armorer mutters over dents like a priest over sinners and keeps a box of rivets that could ransom a small god. Maintenance is ritual because ritual prevents crisis. Before drills you oil joints and stretch feet in circles that ward off hubris. After drills you scrape sweat and sand with a strigil, then rub in oil and a little pride. If a strap rubs, you pat it. If a boot chews a heel, you learn to love the cobbler. Blisters get punctured with care and dressed with a whisper of honey. The medicus says honey makes pus feel unwelcome. You call it sweet revenge. Cuts soak in diluted vinegar that can clean a spear point and a story in one pour. Eyes, assaulted by dust and braggadocio, get rinsed with rose water if the lanista is feeling generous, or with plain water if he is budgeting for lions. Historians still argue whether gladiator mortality per bout hovered in single-digit percentages or spiked in certain reigns and venues. Inscriptions that list long careers propose lower fatality. Moralists' fire suggests oceans of blood. They also puzzle over the extent of specialized gladiator surgeons. Did every ludus keep a surgical specialist, or did General Medici adapt? Galen's boasts hint at both pride and specialization. Archaeology hands us toolkits and trusts us to be reasonable. The valetudinarium rhythm, rest, rehab, return, is as strict as any parade. Day 1. Immobilize the thing that wants to keep moving. Day 2. Teach it to move without complaining. Day 3. Test with wicker, not oak. Day 4. Spar light, no lunges. Day 5. Report to the doctors and pretend to be humble. If you lie, the medicus will see you in the way your foot kisses the sand or how your braith fidgets under the rib strap. Lie twice, and the lanista will bill your courage at a discount. There is also maintenance for morale. Small shrines near the clinic collect tiny offerings, coins to Nemesis, a sprig of laurel, a crude palm scratched into plaster. The medicus keeps a jar of recovered trident barbs and sling bullets labeled. Could have been worse. He shakes it when a trainee sulks. The cook keeps a stash of dried figs for men cleared after a week in wraps. He distributes them with the ceremonial gravity of a victory crown. The bathhouse, when the schedule permits, becomes a temple of prevention, hot room to relax clenched jaw, warm pool to persuade a knot to become a story, cold plunge to remind you that you are not dead yet. Mainstream anchor, tidy as gauze. Strigils and oil as part of daily hygiene are ubiquitous in Roman contexts. Baths serve health as well as sociability. Military valetudinaria plans map onto care spaces we can imagine in a large ludus. Pain remedies including opium and mandrake are listed by ancient medical authors. Cautery and ligature for bleeding are standard. Splints and slings are common sense carved into wood and linen. The ash calcium tonic is supported by isotopic analysis of gladiator bones from Ephesus suggesting higher mineralization than comparable civilian remains. Light joke 4. The armorer declares your helmet Now twice as shiny and once as heavy. You ask for a discount on sunshine. Light joke 5. The Summa Rudis wanders in and warns that fowls void warranties. The armorer says referees void afternoons. Light joke 6. The cook claims his porridge cures all ills. The medicus says it causes 1. Boredom. Quirky tidbit. Somebody issued. Sick leave tokens. Small lead or clay disc stamped for a day's rations at the barracks window. So malingering could be counted rather than guessed. Another. A few helmets have inscriptions scratched inside. Felix's don't steal. And a crude tally of how many times the visor was replaced. The armorer's diary hiding under a brow. You notice that nothing in this system pretends you're indestructible. The Ludus protects its investment, yes, but also polishes a philosophy, make failure difficult. Feet dried and oiled, straps padded and checked, weapons honest, drills arranged to fortify what breaks and rest what lies about being fine. Your job is to obey the schedule the way you obey the Summa Rudis. When the baton says stop, stop. When it says start, start. When it hovers and tilts, breathe and let another man's craft keep you numbered. Historians still argue. How often theriac, that famous compound remedy of dozens of ingredients including opium, entered gladiator care. Imperial kitchens brewed it, elite doctors praised it, skeptics smirked. Did a star get theriac before a marquee bout, or was it reserved for emperors and headaches with poets? The evidence shrugs, and the medicus reaches for wine and honey because they are always in budget.by dusk. The clinic's instruments lie on linen like soldiers dismissed. The armory smells of oil and bronze, polite and satisfied. You rub ash water between forefinger and thumb and try not to grimace. You rub oil into a strap and try to imagine a day when it won't bite. Tomorrow the Paulus will demand 100 thrusts again. The medicus will demand fewer lies. The armorer will demand fewer dents. The cook will demand that you stop calling porridge helmet paste. You slide onto your pallet under the hum of leather drying on pegs and sleep to the small, dependable sounds of survival. A last strigil scrape. A cork easing back into a jar, someone in the dark whispering. Breathe, feet first, tip of the blade says hello. As if maintenance could be a lullaby. It is. You wake one morning convinced the arena runs on sweat and noise, then spend an hour with the Lanista's ledger, and realize it runs on arithmetic that sweats quietly. The sand drinks blood. The box office drinks coin. You are both performer and line item, and the Colosseum is not only a theater, it's a marketplace with better costumes. Every roar has a price, every mercy a margin, every trapdoor a budget line that squeaks when the capstan ropes need replacing. Start where the money enters. The editor Muneris, today's sponsor. Sometimes he's an ambitious magistrate chasing office with confetti. Sometimes the emperor, buying loyalty wholesale with free seats and a week of. Remember who feeds you. He pays for the card, fees to the ludi that supply paired fighters, fees to bestiarii and beast dealers, sets, scenery, extra guards, musicians, sailors to wrangle the velarium, and the small fortune in water carriers and sweepers who make, after, look less like during. If he's an edile of the old kind, he groans and smiles at once. Invest in reputation, pay in denarii, collect in votes. If he's the emperor, the treasury absorbs the brews and coins proclaim generosity until they jingle in dreams. Mainstream fact, countable as a stack of asses. Inscriptions record editors boasting the number of pairs they staged. 20, 50, 100, and the days of shows. Suetonius and Cassius Dio describe emperors underwriting prolonged spectacles. Municipal decrees limit bankrupting exuberance. Contracts between Lanista and editor. Libelli, specified types, numbers, and missio policies. Gladiators earned appearance fees and prize bonuses out of which the Ludus took its contractual cut. Some emperors established public funds for spectacles. Others leaned on rich notables with voluntary, contributions that looked like taxes with laurel wreaths. Your body is an entry called asset. The lanista invests in you, purchase if enslaved, signing bonus if octoratus, food, housing, training, medical care, equipment, and expects a yield. Appearance fees pass through his hands first. He deducts the cost of the shield you chipped, the helmet you dented, the ash water you gagged down, the stitch kit you bled on, and the song the doctors claimed they needed to teach footwork. Your bonus for a victory arrives as coin, sometimes topped with gifts from the editor, a belt plate, a gold ring if he's showy, or a purse waved publicly for applause. You feel momentarily rich until the armorer hands you a bill for a new trident tine and the cook suggests investing in beans. Vendors are the arena's unofficial chorus. Nuts, dates, sausages, vinegar water, cheap wine, cushions for rent, small clay lamps and stamped flasks, terracotta cups with caricatured helms, palm fronds at a markup suspiciously indexed to victory rates. Licenses to hawk are sold or granted by the day. The editor might recoup a sliver of cost in fees. The city certainly does. Outside, bookmakers with long memories and short scruples take whispered wagers behind pillars. Inside, the summa rudis pretends to see nothing except fowls and romance. Light joke 1. A sausage seller claims his recipe is secret. A legionary says so is the source of the meat, and both agree not to inquire further. Light joke 2. A cushion renter offers deluxe softness. A philosopher asks for moderate firmness, and the vendor says, "We do not stock ethics. Animals are a budget that eats while you sleep. Lions don't ship themselves from Africa. Leopards don't politely queue at Ostia. Boars don't come with invoices, they come with tusks." The empire's menagerie economy hums from frontier to forum. Trappers, imperial agents, provincial contractors, shipmasters, muleteers, custodes who keep the beasts half tame and wholly dangerous. A single morning's vinatio can cost a small fort's annual upkeep. A week-long festival with exotic imports becomes a ledger that squeals in Sabine. The Colosseum's underground sells stock beasts like living coin. Every cage has a price. Every roar has a receipt. Historians still argue whether the state actively managed an empire-wide beast supply bureau in the early empire or whether private contractors dominated under broad imperial licenses. In some reigns, evidence suggests official hunters and imperial estates breeding or collecting stock. In others, municipal edits and private inscriptions imply a looser, more entrepreneurial trade. They also argue the scale of costs. Ancient authors love to exaggerate numbers, but even conservative estimates make clear venations were stupendously expensive prestige acts. Stagecraft costs like ambition. Painted backdrops, artificial groves, rocking ships, for mock sea raids, with water modestly implied once the hypogeum filled the underworld, fountains that spritz saffron-scented mists, sluices that wash sand between acts, winches that hoist cages, capstan axles that need frequent love, torches and pitch, spare nets, spare helmets, spare patience. The hypogeum crew, rope men, carpenters, animal handlers, draws wages higher than a street porter and lower than their valor deserves. They leave chalk marks and curses on pillars. At month's end, the building manager, a practical magician, argues with the editor's steward over overtime for a lion that got philosophical at an awkward hour. Your ludus is a business with the showroom. The lanista negotiates bundles. 3 murmillos, 2 retiarii, a thraex with knee you can trust, 1 secutor who smells like victory. The editor wants star names and crowd-pleasing pairings. The lanista wants safety clauses, missio ratios that keep investments unforked. Some editors pay extra for novitates, novelty matches with andabate or equites or a greco, grappling interlude, just enough innovation to stir gossip without confusing the ritual. Contracts include per diem for lodging and fodder, for horses and rumor, transport costs, and penalties if a fighter breaks before the trumpet does. Mainstream anchor, sober as a steward, reliefs and graffiti advertise venations with counts of animals, edicts cap spending for municipal officials, epitaphs of lanisti and procurators, managers, display pride in well-run schools, price edicts. Diocletian's later edict on maximum prices lists wages for performers and stagehands, hinting at an economy that knew the cost of a rope and a roar. Coins and inscriptions celebrate imperial largesse. Ostraca and tablets record mundane expenses, oil, wood, fodder, that turn spectacle into shift work. Tickets straddle gift and commerce. In Rome proper, the emperor's games are free, but seating is currency. Senators named on marble, equestrians next, citizens by tribe and assignation, women in the upper area accept the vestals, foreign delegations and little honored wedges. In provinces and private munera, paid tickets, tessery of bone or clay, a portion cost to appetite. Sportually, little gift baskets of cash or food may sweeten attendance. A sparsio, shower of coins or tokens redeemable for gifts, creates a drizzle of goodwill. A clever editor places his name on every token. Later that night, kitchens ring with "Bless his purse." Sponsorships slink in where vanity lives. Wealthy houses underwrite a morning act in exchange for banners. A guild of fullers funds a troupe of comedic mimes between bouts. An oil merchant donates amphorae to refill fountain basins in return for permission to stamp his emblem on lamp wicks. The line between civic generosity and advertising is as thin as a wax tablet and as well trafficked. Light joke 3. A banker offers to sponsor the mercy portion of decisions. The Summa Rudis replies mercy will not be securitized this season. Your future is a budget outcome. When often, and the editor pays a bonus, rack up clean missio with brilliant technique, and fans lobby for your Rudis ceremony in a year the emperor needs good stories. A wooden sword costs nothing and buys headlines. Freedom granted by the generous editor, says the inscription he pays to have carved. Retired fighters return as doctors or take their savings to a tavern lease that smells like barley and memory. Fail often, and you slide into cheap undercard slots where missio is stingier and the crowd fits on 2 benches. The ledger will close you when sentiment cannot keep you solvent. Historians still argue whether gladiators themselves captured a significant share of profits or remained modestly paid, with only stars amassing wealth. Inscriptions with lavish tombs argue for a few rich careers. Legal texts about octorati fines and penalties suggest most lived like skilled artisans, comfortable if cautious. The Lanistas cut varied by region and contract language. Moralists, predictably, insisted everyone was overpaid except moralists. The emperor's propaganda accountant never sleeps. Coin reverses depict the amphitheater. Inscriptions trumpet the number of pairs and animals. For the people, poets praise spectacular machinery as if mercy and mechanics were cousins. After earthquakes or fires, restoration inscriptions rebrand calamity as benevolence. Repaired swiftly by Caesar. Distributions of grain, fermentations, may be paired with games so bellies and eyes fill on the same day. A 2-pronged policy that teaches love in the coin it understands. Quirky tidbit. Some tessery for seats double as raffle tickets, redeemable for a loaf, oil, or a small bronze trinket stamped with the editor's monogram. Another. A few ludi offer branded oil flasks of their star fighters at a premium. A Retiarius in terracotta sells better if his trident is comically oversized. The Lanista pretends to hate it while counting quietly. Costs also hide in silence. Security squads to separate feuding fans. Pompey's riot taught the treasury what brawls cost. Repairs to the podium balustrade after a particularly enthusiastic net toss. Hush money to a beast handler bidden in a non-philosophical place hours before showtime. The steward's wax tablets list these under incidental. The steward's sigh lists them under again. Light joke 4. The building manager says rope is dear. The sailors say wind is free. The manager replies wind brings bills. Light joke 5. The editor's scribe asks if applause can be indexed. The steward says it already was, twice. Light joke 6. A boy finds a Sparcio token for 1 fig, and trades it for 2 olives, inventing futures. Mainstream aside, tidy as a balance sheet. Emperors like Trajan, Titus, and Domitian are reported to have staged extravagant games. Pliny the Younger criticizes wasteful private munera. Municipal laws set spending ceilings. Ostraca from Egypt and tablets from Pompeii reveal the cost of everything from lamp oil to carpenters' day rates. The economy of the games was not an occasional splurge. It was a perennial ecosystem that fed shipowners, traders, smiths, medics, cooks, rope makers, and 1,000 hands that never once heard a cheer. Historians still argue how much the Colosseum's finances entwined with broader urban budgets. Were maintenance and staff folded into general city accounts or managed as a near-autonomous palace department? The paper trail is fragmentary. What's clear is continuity. Spectacles carried Rome's story from reign to reign because money was found, redirected, or invented when applause was required. By dusk, you understand why the sand feels strangely like a counting table. Your feet learn numbers long before you read them. 3 rations for a week, 5 throws in practice, 7 knots on the net's drawstring, 1 palm for today, 2 coins for oil, a distant rudis whose price no one will tell you until the day it's free. The city pours itself through numbered arches. The editor counts favors, the lanista counts bruises, the steward counts ropes, the vendor counts change. You wash your hands in water paid for by a guild whose sign hangs discreetly by the fountain and taste the faintest hint of saffron from a pump that refuses to be outdone. Tomorrow, the ledger opens again. Tomorrow, the pampa promenades. Tomorrow, the sand balances spectacle and solvency with the grim cheer of professionals. You turn in, a coin's edge catching lamplight on your table, a reminder that even courage has a cashier. You descend into the Colosseum's underworld and discover that the day's courage rides on other creatures' breath and carpenters' patience. Above, the arena looks like a circle of noon. Below, it is a forest of posts, pulleys, winches, and cages, a grid labyrinth smelling of straw, pitch, cat, and calculation. Handlers murmur to lions in the soothing voice all professionals use with problems that possess teeth. A carpenter rubs chalk on a timber and draws an arrow that means, "This way up, and please don't make me famous for the wrong reason." The hypogeum isn't a basement. It's a promise that timing will look like magic. You walk past the lifts, vertical shafts with sliding platforms that shouldered scenery an hour ago and will shoulder leopards at noon. Capstans stand like wooden altars, their horizontal arms waiting for teams of men to lean into them. When the foreman slaps the beam and counts, bodies become gears. Each shaft has a trapdoor above shaped to its trick, a square hatch for a grove of painted oaks, a smaller lid for an ostrich that learned to sprint before it learned to admire scenery, a stout double door for a litter carrying a condemned man costumed as a myth who never applied for the role. Someone has chalked a crude fish on a pillar to mark where water once rose. Someone else has scratched the name of a girl and a lion as if both were habits. Morning's venations begin as stagecraft. The arena floor sprouts bushes that were flat planks an hour ago. A fake stream gurgles just enough to win applause. A painted cliff leans at an angle that promises both Africa and the carpenter's sense of humor. The beast gangs, custodes, shuffle their charges into position, a boar with a grudge against geometry, a pair of Nubian lions that pace like a duet, a spotted leopard whose tail writes insults in the dust. Bestiarii test spear points, nets, and the distance between bravery and choreography. A trumpeter curls a note, the first hatch pops, and a cat appears with the offended dignity of a minor deity who discovered tickets were involved. Mainstream fact, hard as a ram's skull. The Colosseum's hypogeum, added under Domitian, contained a network of corridors, cells, lifts, and capstans, dozens of hoists operated by human muscle, to raise cages and scenery through trapdoors. Literary sources, Martial, Cassius Dio, and amphitheater mosaics show sophisticated Venetians with set pieces, imported animals, lions, leopards, bears, boars, ostriches, and staged hunts. The archaeology reveals post holes, guide slots, and where patterns that map a backstage machine. Stagehands time cues with signals, horn chirps, a runner's shout, to make the arena's miracles arrive on beat. You watch a bestiarius dance with a leopard and recognize the script written in scars. Lure with movement, test with feint, thrust to wound or tire, parry the airborne opinion that arrives with spots and claws. The handler's partner drives the cat toward a rock, which is really a protective ledge. If the leap goes wrong, a quick scramble lands him behind painted safety. A third man cracks a whip, not to hurt but to punctuate. Cats dislike surprise almost as much as carpenters do. When the bout ends, the crowd gives that complicated sound it reserves for skill that did not kill, admiration with a little guilt. Light joke 1. A handler claims he can tell a lion's mood by whisker tilt. The carpenter says he can tell a carpenter's mood by splinter count. Light joke 2. An ostrich sprints, the audience laughs, and the writer inside you notes that legs are always funny until they aren't. Light joke 3. A bestiarius names his favorite boar, lunch. The cook says he prefers soon. Midday's punishments bend stagecraft toward myth. A condemned man plays Orpheus. Handlers cue a reluctant menagerie. A hidden piper rehearses a tune that will not save anyone. Another, hero, as Daedalus climbs a contraption of ladders and canvas, wings. The crowd knows what gravity knows and cheers anyway. Sometimes the floor itself betrays. A hinge reveals a spiked bed. A painted grove becomes a snare. You notice how often wood and rope do the talking. You notice how much time the crew spends teaching wood and rope to pronounce names properly. Historians still argue whether full amphitheatrical naval battles, nomachii, ever flooded the Colosseum once the hypogeum existed. Early sensational dedications may have staged shallow water displays before Domitian's understage maze made deep flooding impractical. Purpose-built basins elsewhere in Rome, e.g., the Nomachia Augusti, hosted larger ship spectacles. The conservative read, the Colosseum excelled at water effects, mists, sprinklers, sluices for cleaning, storm pantomimes, while true naval pageants belonged to lakes and basins that didn't breathe through trapdoors. Perfume drifts even here. A boy by the pumps holds amphory of saffron-infused water. At a queue, attendants above twist bronze nozzles and a fine spray sweetens heat and hides the smell of cat and consequence. The Sparcio rains tokens or petals from clever funnels tucked under the awning cornice. Brief weather with the sponsor's name stamped on it. The audience looks up and forgets to argue. The sailors who run the velarium grin and mutter seawords because canvas obeys them even when marble doesn't. Quirky tidbit, ostriches, less majestic than lions, became crowd darlings for speed and comic threat. Some bestiarii specialized in racing them across a trapped floor where sudden sand-soft patches turned grace into slapstick. Another, trained deer and goats sometimes performed capers between executions and duels. Palate cleansers that made cruelty seem curated. You return below and watch the capstan crew at work. 8 men per beam, staggered around the axle. Leather pads on shoulders. A chant that turns breath into timing. The foreman listens for the hiss of a guide runner rubbing dry. A boy with a pot of tallow scampers into hushed friction. Above, a trapdoor lifts. Light spills down the shaft. The caged cat turns into a silhouette with opinions. A handler bangs twice on a post. Hold. The trumpet trills. The foreman slaps. The cage rises. You see the geometry of hazard: hands close to teeth, feet close to edges, minds close to fear, and you realize this is the bravest quiet job in Rome. Historians still argue how many lifts operated simultaneously and how quickly sets could change. Reconstructions suggest dozens of shafts and a ballet of capstans allowing rapid transformations. Practical engineers caution that human muscle systems have limits. They also debate the training and status of stage crews. Were they slaves, freedmen, specialists, or a mix? Inscriptions hint at named machinators, machinery masters, and animal masters with pride enough for epitaphs. The sensible conclusion: mixed crews led by skilled foremen, paid in coin and adrenaline. Costume is stagecraft's polite cousin. The arena dresses myths to make morals visible. A condemned bandit becomes Attis, in bright cap and tunic before a choreographed demise by Bohr. A notorious arsonist plays Mucius Scaevola, and learns that scripted heroism doesn't commute to pardons. Bestiarii wear crested caps, greaves, and armed guards that say professional, in bronze. Sometimes a leopard skin drapes a shoulder. Half hunters boast, half wardrobes wink. On high holidays, scenery rises with extra gilding, and the pampa brings gods carved in wood on rolling platforms that threaten to upstage everyone, including gods. Light joke 4. A sailor watching the lifts claims, "It's just rigging upside down." The carpenter replies, "And gravity upside down, so hush." Light joke 5. A handler says his hyenas laugh at his jokes. The Summa Rutus says he has the same problem with senators. Light joke 6. The painter of scenery rocks insists he has invented a new color called expensive. Safety rules down here are as ritualized as mercy gestures above. No hand inside a cage past the second knuckle. No leaning over a shaft without a man on your belt. No uncued release of a trap unless the foreman points with his whole arm. A boy who broke the whole arm rule has fewer fingers than stories. He tells both to every new hire. The beast pens have double gates. The inner always closed before the outer opens. The hinges whisper law in iron tongues. A chalk tally near the exit counts. Days since last bite. Today, optimistically reads 3. Mainstream anchor, ledger straight. Evidence for the hypogeum's machinery includes masonry slots for guide rails, post holes for capstan anchoring, where on thresholds where sliding platforms moved. Descriptions in Marshall's The Spectaculous and others praise sudden appearances of animals and scenery. Mosaic scenes, e.g., Slyton, show trapdoors, lifts, and crews. Scented showers, spargians, are mentioned. Awning crews from the Misenum fleet are attested. Venations stocked with imported animals are a drumbeat across texts and images. Historians still argue the scale of animal use over centuries. Did the Flavian heyday drain provinces of predators, or did supply stabilize through estate management and imperial breeding centers? Some provinces show late antique declines in big cats. Cause and effect remain a scholarly wrestling match. They also argue the ethics of crowd taste. Were Roman audiences desensitized monsters or participants in a ritual of power, fear, and control? The arena, like modern screens, reflects both appetites and anxieties. The debate is really about us. Afternoons duels borrow morning's machinery for drama. A Retiarius cornered near a rock leaps onto it and gains a precious heartbeat. A cicuta ducks under a painted branch and nearly discovers that paint can bruise. An Andabatus blunders into a foam tree that deflates his menace into comedy. The crew below times a wind effect. Sailcloth waved through a slot to make a dust devil spiral while 2 Thereses trade feints. A rain of petals hides a quick swap of scenery. The crowd thinks the gods approve. When the bout ends, attendants rake the sand and uncover a hatch where a boar will arrive tomorrow. Stagecraft's future sleeps under today's footprints. Quirky tidbit 2. Some animal handlers train bears to sit on low stools and box. with padded paws, a crowd pleaser that let everyone pretend the morning didn't mostly teach death. Another, ostrich feather fans doubled as signaling devices. 2 quick waves from the podium meant cut the wind effect. 1 long sweep meant more saffron, less dust. The secret language of men who dislike shouting where cats are listening. By dusk you climb back to daylight with a new respect for everything audiences aren't supposed to see. The arena floor glows smooth as if it hadn't betrayed anyone's plans today. The painted grove looks surprisingly fresh for a place where courage sprinted. A single feather lies near a trap seem like punctuation. You know now that the magic was a choreography of wrists, shoulders, hemp, and timing, that the bestiarius's nerve depended on a carpenter's square, that a lion's roar began as a contract and a crate. Tomorrow will smell of straw again, the foreman will slap the capstan, the boy with the tallow will run, and a city will applaud mechanisms disguised as miracles. You roll the feather between finger and thumb until it remembers sky, then tuck it into your belt where small charms live. Above, the awning's last rope thrums with evening. Below, the hypogeum cools to a whisper. You step out into the street, and for a heartbeat, imagine every house in Rome with its own little trapdoor, every family lifting supper and gossip to the table by capstan, every day a performance hidden in plain sight. The arena taught you a secret none of the posters mention. Spectacle is just stagecraft with courage on top. You take a seat on the practice gallery rail and notice a ripple in the yard's usual grammar. 2 fighters moving with the same disciplined economy, helms crested, greaves high, but hips and shoulders telling a different old story. The murmurs below the balcony confirm what your eyes announce. Gladiatrices, women of the sand, rare enough to pull attention taut, real enough to collect wagers. The ludus doesn't treat them like legends, it treats them like schedules. A doctor adjusts a manica, the medicus fusses with a strap, and the lanista taps his wax tablet because arithmetic does not blink. Mainstream fact, hammered like a rivet, women did fight in Roman arenas, attested in literature and carved in stone. Juvenal sneers, as he does, about high-born ladies training, and Cassius Dio records that under Domitian women and even dwarfs contended by torchlight. Suetonius notes Nero staging female performers. Reliefs from Halicarnassus show 2 gladiatrices, Amazon and Achillea, paired name on name like any male billing. Inscriptions echo these hints. The phenomenon is not fantasy, just infrequent and fashionable, novelty threaded into the larger ritual. The training yard applies the same verbs with lighter nouns. Footwork first, short steps, spirals that make a heavy shield chase shadows, the discipline of breathing where fear wants to write a paragraph. Gear next, small parmula shields for Thraic-style work, high ochre to protect shins from curious blades, helmets scaled to brow and jaw, psyche curved like questions, sometimes a provocator's kit with breastplate, equal opponent pairing to please the rulebook. A doctrix, yes, sometimes a seasoned woman, walks the line and corrects elbows with a tap that sounds exactly like the doctor's tap sounded in your own ear when you learned to keep your shield proud. Light joke 1. A retiree from the men's yard mutters that the net is too complicated for novices. The retiarius across the lane calls back, "Ben, how did you learn it?" And the yard enjoys the silence that follows. Light joke 2. The armorer claims he's invented a lighter helmet. The gladiatrix asks if he'll also invent a lighter opponent. Light joke 3. The cook insists porridge is unisex. The entire school agrees grimly. Stagecraft loves novelty, and editors adore conversation pieces. Torchlit exhibitions, flames reflected on bronze, a drumbeat slower than noon, turn the sand into a theater of silhouettes. Sometimes women face women, sometimes a mixed pairing proves the point that rules and referees, not gender, govern the conversation. The summa rudis wields the same long baton and the same authority. Surrender arrives as raised finger. Missio as the editor's visible decision. Palms and crowns feel no difference in the hand. What changes is the crowd's tone, less bellow, more quick intake of breath. The sound cities make when their own stories surprise them. Historians still argue whether female fighters were primarily a Julio-Claudian and Flavian novelty, or whether they persisted more broadly into the 2nd century before bans took bite. Hadrian reportedly restricted senatorial class women from the arena. Septimius Severus is said to have forbade female combat entirely after 200 CE, though whether entirely meant in Rome or anywhere is a scholarly tug-of-war. They also argue frequency. Were these rare headliners or occasional sideshows? The ledger of evidence is narrow. The safest read is uncommon, conspicuous, and legislated when fashions offended. Economy, unromantic as always, writes its quiet clauses. Contracts for gladiatrices list appearance fees that make a steward purse his lips. Novelty priced high, risk priced higher. The Lanista markets carefully names that promise myth. Amazon, Media, Aquileia, and styles that photograph well on mosaic. Curved Sicca catching torchlight, crest plumes exaggerated for silhouettes. The editor buys not only skill but conversation. Did you see them by lamplight? Is worth 2 mornings of Venetians and the city's gossip exchange. A clever ludus pairs a women's bout with a charitable sparsio. Oil tokens stamped with the fighters' nicknames flutter down, and pride goes home scented. Quirky tidbit. A satirist grumbles about a noblewoman who hunts boars bare-breasted in the arena. A scene scholars read as Mevia under Augustus. A performative outlier that moralists love to hate. Another. The Halicarnassus relief labels each woman with stage names that parody Homeric heroes. A wink that the audience would have understood and chuckled at as easily as we understand the hammer on a boxing poster. The sand never misses a chance to borrow old thunder. The gear room tells you adaptation is respect. Helmets are trimmed for fit, not frill. Manichae stitched with the same linen padding as the men's. Greaves tightened to calves that will sprint the same distance. A few gladiatrices train in Retiarius kit but keep short hair or a snug cap. Nets happily tangle any style, and pragmatism outranks vanity. The medicus does not rewrite anatomy. Wine cleans, honey seals, sutures close with the same meat bite, and ash water tonic tastes equally terrible to everyone. A stitched brow reads as courage in any language. Light joke 4. The Summa Rudis claims his baton is equal opportunity. The Secunda Rudis nods and fines him for making a speech. Light joke 5. A vendor slaps Amazon dates on his tray. A gladiatrix buys 2 and requests a discount for brand use. The vendor says publicity is payment. Light joke 6. A senator complains that torch smoke stings his eyes. A sailor from the awning crew offers him wind, cheap. Ritual presses its signet into these nights just the same. The pomp includes the women. Helm crests gleaming like small comets, shoulders oiled, faces anonymized by grills that turn gossip into guesswork. They pause at Nemesis's altar. They touch hilts to the referee's baton. They salute the editor with the measured dignity of professionals who've negotiated their clauses. The crowd performs its part, too. Cheers, hisses, chantable names. But a space opens at the edge of the noise where a new script tries its lines. You hear it in the way 2 grandmothers argue in the Summa Cavia. One says, "Shameful." One says, "Skillful." Both watch every step. Mainstream anchor, square and serviceable, Cassius Dio, 66.25, mentions women and dwarf combats under Domitian. Juvenal, Saturday 6, lampoons upper-class women training, implying it happened. Suetonius records female performers in Nero's spectacles. Inscriptions and reliefs, Halicarnassus, explicitly show and name gladiatrices. Hadrian's rescript bans upper-class participation. The Historia Augusta attributes a broader ban to Septimius Severus. contested in scope but useful as evidence that the phenomenon needed curbing in imperial eyes. Historians still argue whether women trained in separate facilities or alongside men in Major Ludi. The Ludus Magnus plan does not sing names, texts are coy. Practicality suggests shared yards with separated dormitories and schedules, especially for rare stars. They also debate whether kit weights were reduced. Surviving helmets are male-sized, but adaptation by armor seems obvious. The evidence is underspecified, the logic is not. Technique does not blush. You watch a Thraic-style gladiatrix bait a Murmillo into overextending the big shield, snap a Sika around the rim for a bright kiss on bronze, then vanish sideways with the same smug geometry you've envied in male masters. You watch a provocator pair play chess with stabs and feints, breastplates chiming like polite bells. You watch a mixed exhibition, a retiarius and measured jabs, a secutor rolling pressure, staged to a chalk limit, more about virtuosity than verdict, the baton ready to freeze and praise. The crowd can read quality. It claps correctly. Economy bleeds into afterlives. A famous gladiatrix retires with a wooden sword and opens a small gym between a fuller and a lamp shop. Girls dare each other to touch the rudest hung like a saint's bone. Another vanishes into marriage with a dowry earned in sand and a husband who learns quickly that opinions require footwork. Inscriptions sometimes remember names with fondness rather than scorn. Proof that charisma survives moralists every single time. Quirky tidbit 2. Hairpins confiscated before bouts are tallied like daggers. One more backstage joke about safety. And returned in a basket that looks like a shrine to quotidian vanity. Another, a boy in the stands copies Amazonia Victrix onto his tablet, scratches out Amazonia, writes Achillea, scratches, writes his own name instead, discovers fandom's oldest reflex, wanting glory by proximity. Not every audience claps cleanly. You hear the hiss of those who came to see a rule break and were vexed to find it kept. You hear the sharper hiss of those who came to be scandalized and were seduced by skill. Somewhere a philosopher drafts a letter about decorum. Somewhere an editor drafts a budget note about lamp oil because torchlit shows cost extra. The law will eventually fix the fashion. Legislation often follows envy disguised as virtue. Tonight, though, the lamps burn, the batons arbitrate, and the sand writes a footnote in a hand bold enough to be legible 2,000 years later. Historians still argue. The social origins of the women who fought, enslaved and condemned are obvious streams. Octorati are possible, free women signing contracts for novelty's wage. Juvenal's portrait of elite ladies in the yard is satire with likely kernels. Epigraphy is stingy with family backgrounds. Archaeology cannot recover gossip. What it can recover are letters on stone that spell pride.by the time the torch is gutter. You've learned that rarity isn't fragility. The ritual, salute, baton, missio, flexes without breaking. The economy nods and counts. The yard teaches movement to bodies that insist on being strong. Tomorrow the yard returns to its usual thunder of wood on wood, the same porridge and ash water tonic, the same armorer scolding straps, the same medicus rehearsing stitches with his tidy hands. But somewhere on the wall, a fresh charcoal scrawl joins the old boast lists, a crescent helm, a curved blade, two names divided by a dot. When you see it in daylight, you'll smile at the neat letters and the way the dot looks like a torch seen from far up in the Summa Cavia, small, stubborn, and bright. You file through a numbered arch and feel the city sort itself around you like a polite storm. A slave with a clay tessera bumps your elbow. A senator's cloak brushes the opposite breeze. A baker's apprentice counts steps out loud because math helps when marble intimidates. The Colosseum's genius isn't only stone, it's choreography. A small disc in your palm, sector, row, seat scratched by a bored clerk, becomes a compass that guides you up one stair, left at a fork, and into a wedge of sky that the building swears is yours for the day. The seating plan is a map of Rome's manners. Closest to the sand sits the podium. Senators on named marble, Vestal virgins dignified in their special front row bench, the emperor's box with a view that turns decisions into theater. Above, the equestrian order occupies its belt. Then the broad citizen tiers where tribes mix but still keep the pecking order comfortable. Higher still, the summa cavea, wooden bleachers for women, except the vestals, and those whose purses prefer the breeze. Stairs slice the tiers into cunei, wedges, each serviced by its own vomitorium so crowds never learn what bottleneck feels like. Mainstream fact you can anchor to mosaics and texts. Roman amphitheaters stratified seating by law. Names were carved on senator benches. The cavea rose in social rings. Exits multiplied for speed. A city famous for argument learned to sit in sentences. Fandom grows wherever regular seating teaches routine. You notice clusters, little collegia of habit, who favor a particular style. The retiarius romantics with tidy nets of rhetoric. The Mirmillo partisans who consider big shields a moral philosophy. A few hoplomachus nostalgics who claim Greek point work is civilization's spine. They don't wear team colors like the circus factions do, but they cheer in dialects. Near the rail a pair of older men debate the summa rudis like lawyers. Behind you, 3 girls rehearse the chant for Crescens, yes, that name, graffiti in Pompeii calls him. The girl's darling. The amphitheater doesn't train factions the way the Circus Maximus does. No blues and greens. But loyalties still root in sand. Light joke 1. A cushion vendor offers senatorial softness. A legionary asks if there's an auxiliary discount. The vendor says softness knows no treaties. Light joke 2. A philosopher declares he applauds only technique. His neighbor asks if sausages count as technique. Philosophy retreats with dignity. Light joke 3. A boy waves his palm frond like a standard and nearly decapitates a pigeon. The pigeon files a silent protest and the section approves. Your tessera is more than a key, it's a souvenir in training. Fans keep them, bone, clay, or lead, strung on cords. Some are stamped with the editor's name or an image of the amphitheater. Others double as raffle tokens. Sparcio promises a loaf, an oil ladle, a coin. If the emperor sponsors, entry is free but position is priceless. If a private editor pays, tickets may cost a few coppers and buy you the right to argue about value all afternoon. Outside, a hawker sells terracotta cups with caricatured helms and tiny oil flasks stamped Secutor Felix or Rediarius Hilaris, portable loyalties you can sip from later. Mainstream anchor, amphitheater lamps, cups, and flasks depicting gladiators survive in quantity. Bone tesserae stamped with gates and numbers turn up in digs. Sparsions are attested in literary descriptions and reliefs. The crowd has rituals of its own. They chant names in meter. They wave cloths to beg missio or to demand a cleaner bout. They hiss when fouls flirt with farce or when a decision smells like politics. The Vestals, poised and practical, sometimes signal mercy and get it. A senator might theatricalize magnanimity. A guild of fullers may erupt when their man lands a clean thrust. The referee's baton keeps the line between passion and peril. But noise has a way of bending wood. The editor knows when to pretend the crowd persuaded him. Historians still argue whether the amphitheater had stable fan clubs that approached circus faction organization, named groups with officials and dues, or whether gladiator fandom remained looser, episodic, written in charcoal and gossip rather than bylaws. The circus factions are well attested. Amphitheater factions live more in graffiti clusters. Crescents, victory! And in the patterns of repeat spectatorship suggested by seatwear and shop signs near Liddy. The safe reading, devotion without uniforms, neighborhoods of enthusiasm rather than leagues. Seating formalizes fairness and distance. The marble balustrade of the podium keeps beasts and accidents on their side of the politics. High railings and step aisles encourage applause to flow, not bodies. Ushers, locarii, guard stares with polite ferocity. A mis-seated citizen is rerouted with a finger, a nod, and the timeless phrase, "This is not your place." Security squads with vine staves are discreet but numerous. Pompey's riot in 59 C, famous for the ban and the moralizing letters afterward, taught Rome to balance fun with a small army in plain clothes. Quirky tidbit: some steps carry faint numos chiseled into risers, sector markers for ushers that modern tourists mistake for prayers. You look down and see fans as statisticians. Wax tablets tally wins and missio as if futures could be priced. Boys trade scratched potsherds that say, "Murmillo ex vict," like proto-baseball cards. A butcher promises a free scrap to anyone showing a palm branch after his secutor wins. Graffiti near Ludi add to the ledger. Crescens, secutor, 1/6 of 9. Calamus, Rediarius, misses twice, still beloved. The numbers teach the crowd where skill lives. The crowd teaches numbers which names deserve dice games and daydreams. Mainstream fact, tidy as a seat label. Pompeian graffiti record gladiator names and results. The riot of 59 C at Pompeii between Pompeians and Nisirians during a show led to expulsion of the games for a decade. Tacitus reports, frescoes commemorate. Seating stratification appears in the Lex Ursinensis, municipal law, and architectural remains. The Vestal's privileged seating is noted across sources. Names carved on senator benches have been identified in multiple amphitheaters. The velarium above turns strangers into co-conspirators. Sailcloth blooms. A collective sigh drifts up. A sailor yanks a line and you get a stripe of shade that becomes friendship by accident. Sailors from Misenum manage the ropes. Fans manage banter across sections. Children count masts and declare the awning a better machine than a ram. Engineers nearby agree in principle, if not in profession. When the saffron spray mists the air, a dozen voices gasp in the same note. When petals fall, you watch a whole cuneus become a garden, and everyone is briefly 12. Light joke 4. An usher tells two men to stop swapping seats. One says he's closer to the action. The other says he's closer to the sausages. The usher says he is closer to the exit. Light joke 5. The equestrian section complains about dust. The woman in the Summa Cavia says she pays extra for wind. Light joke 6. The Vestal bench starts a polite palms up wave for mercy. A vendor starts a less polite wave for nuts. Souvenirs are the currency of memory. You can buy a palm leaf burned with your hero's name, a small bronze medallion to hang in a window, a lamp with a Rediarius etched so crudely he looks like a rake with opinions, a belt charm shaped like a tiny sicca. Back in your insula, you hang these on a nail by the door, and your neighbor, who insists he prefers tragedies at the theater, asks whether Crescens is fighting again next week. He is. The chalk on the Ludus wall says so. Historians still argue whether lotteries assign seats at some games or whether hereditary seating, by tribe blocks, dominated. Some inscriptions hint at ticket distributions by patrons to clients, others at controlled queues and stamped tokens. They also debate how strictly women were confined to the uppermost seats in practice. Moralists bark, archaeology whispers, and the Vestal's front row bench smiles indulgently. There are unwritten rules for being a good fan. Don't stand during the lunge. Do stand during the pampa. Don't throw a cushion until the editor ignores a chorus of mercy and your conscience discovers how to fly. Do throw petals when the Sparcio runs late and the day needs weather. Don't boo a clean missio. Do boo a helmet that accidentally falls twice. Clap for the Summa Rudis when he disentangles a net with style. Clap louder when a fighter, winded and stitched, salutes humbly before leaving under the rail. Quirky tidbit 2. Some sections develop local jokes. Row 6 always shouts, "Feet!" at the second exchange. Acunius near gate Xci sings a rude couplet whenever a secutor trips. The stone remembers. Another, vendors in the upper bleachers tie small cords to baskets and lower, flying trays, to the rows below. A fast hand with a knot becomes fame of a sort. The only place factions harden is in storytelling after. Taverns adopt favorites. Collegia hang lamps with a gladiator emblem. Bathhouse talk turns into policy papers. Brasherii too clever by half. Murmillo's honest as bread. Threeses make the best noise. The circus will always outdo the amphitheater in organized partisanship, but the Colosseum breeds intimate loyalties that feel like family feuds. You can loathe a man's helmet and still toast his missio because it proves that rules held. You can argue an evening into warmth, each of you defending a style like a province that needs representation. Why dust the building empties the way it filled, swift, civil, as if the arches inhaled and returned a city to itself. You watch a senator's litter drift under an arch, a dockworker's laugh carry up a stairwell, a child's palm branch drag like a broom. The ushers stack the wooden barriers at the vomitoria mouths. A sailor coils rope into a patience that will last the night. A custodian sweeps petals into a basket that smells faintly of saffron and coins. You hold your tessera a beat longer than necessary and slide it into your pouch. Tomorrow you'll rub the stamped number with a thumb and remember the angle of a shield, the pause before mercy, the texture of noise when strangers agree. The amphitheater taught you two aligned lessons, that a city can sit without snarling if the stairs are honest, and that affection can be civic when it's trained by ritual and shared sight lines. Fans become a kind of family not because they think alike, but because the building keeps them agreeing on when to breathe. You step into the street, hear distant hawkers already spinning today into nostalgia, and realize you've learned a new watchword that isn't a password, placebo. I will please. The editors try to please, the fighters try to please, the crowd tries to please itself into a story worth telling. You smile, fold the day into your pocket, and go home to argue kindly. You lace your belt with fingers that have learned knots and nerves, and you touch the tiny charm stitched inside the leather. A palm leaf scratched on tin, nothing expensive, everything necessary. The yard has taught you drills. The arena has taught you rules. Now you learn the quiet grammar of luck. Rome is religious in layers, and the amphitheater is a layer cake. Oaths like bedrock, rituals like frosting, superstitions like the sprinkles everyone pretends not to count. The oath came first and still comes often. In the Ludus courtyard you spoke the words that make the body a contract. Uri, vinciri, verberari feroce necari. To be burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. You didn't say them because you love drama. You said them because oaths turn chaos into employment. A clerk scratched your name on a tabula. A doctor's nodded as if Latin could make bones obedient. The linista filed the tablet where ledgers sleep and pride wakes. Mainstream fact, hammered as clean as a nail, the gladiatorial oath is quoted by Petronius, Satirica 117, and echoed in legal and literary sources. Octorati, volunteers, swore it like the enslaved and condemned did, binding themselves to penalties and to pay. The oath is the arena's spine, everything else is choreography. You make a habit of small offerings at the school's little altar. Nemesis gets a honeyed fig, Hercules a pinch of salt, Fortuna the promise you try not to break. On show days the Pampa refreshes the public rite, a stop at the arena's shrine, a splash of wine on the sand, a musician's sober flourish. The Summa Rudis holds his baton like a lictor's fasces and you tap your blade to it. A salute follows, not to fate but to the contract that will pretend to manage it. Between those bookends, oath and salute, superstition threads its gentle leash. Roman religion is a marketplace where piety shops for results. A phylacterion, a little amulet, hangs under your cuirass, a knotted cord on the wrist, ties your courage so it doesn't wander. A wax tablet with a scratched vowel charm sits under the bedroll of the retiarius, who swears vowels are faster than consonants. A thraex traces a circle in dust before every bout and steps into it backwards. A murmillo warms the point of his gladius over a lamp as if steel likes tea. At the gate, a tiny shrine to the genius of the amphitheater collects coin like rain in a gutter. When you pass, you breathe shallowly at the whiff of saffron and ash and hope. Light joke 1. The armorer says oil appeases leather gods. The medicus says cleanliness appeases real ones. You obey both because belts squeak and fevers gossip. Light joke 2. A secutor insists he always puts on the left greave first. His opponent says he always takes it off last. Light joke 3. The retiarius taps the gallerus 3 times for luck. The summa rudis taps it a 4th and calls it interest. Oaths aren't only for fighters. Contracts between linista and editor include clauses about missio, substitutions, and the honest weight of nets and tridents. Tiny legal rights that keep superstition from doing all the work. The stage crew swears by chalked arrows. If one points the wrong way and a cage rises under the wrong hatch, Nemesis won't bother, the foreman will. Sailors of the Valerium mutter sea prayers at masts set in stone, because canvas is canvas even when Rome pretends it's marble. When the trumpet curls its first note, you feel 1,000 private vows line up like spear points. Ushers promise order, vendors promise change, bestiarii promise wrists steady enough to pick a lock between teeth. Historians still argue whether gladiators belong to formal cult associations, mini collegia with dues, feasts, and patron deities, or whether superstition lived mostly in personal shrines and the Ludus's household rites. Some inscriptions hint at groups honoring Nemesis or Hercules. Others look more like spontaneous gratitude carved late at night. The safest sentence: official cults framed the day. Private charms edited it. Bad luck has addresses everyone knows. You do not trip on the threshold when entering the arena. If you do, you pretend it was an inspection of stone quality and start again. You do not speak certain names aloud. An incompetent editor becomes that purse, a notorious lion, the flute, for the sound men made. You avoid counting out loud past 7 when checking dart loops or net weights. Numbers can be suspicious, and 7 is polite. If a helmet falls twice in a week, you do not wear that liner to a bout. If a liner fits only that helmet, you bribe the armorer, who believes more deeply in coin than in curses and therefore solves both. Quirky tidbit: curse tablets, depictions, sometimes target gladiators, thin lead sheets inscribed with "Bind the hands and eyes of," rolled and nailed in graves or thrown into wells. Amphitheater adjacent finds suggest fans, or rivals, asked underworld accountants to fix odds. Another, the goddess Nemesis appears on lamps, rings, and wall paintings near Ludi with measuring rod and bridle. Iconography that whispers no boasting, which gladiators absolutely ignore until the 3rd cup. The oath has a cousin in the bedtime drill. You recite your watchword for yourself. Breathe, feet first, tip of the blade says hello, until sleep mistakes it for comfort. In the morning you rinse hands in vinegar as much for gods as for germs. You touch the doorpost twice because once is forgetful and thrice is greedy. You step into the yard on the right foot because teachers and augurs agree for once. On the way to the arena, you avoid the street where a particular fig tree sheds syrup that stains greaves like omens. The ludus laughs, the linista shrugs, the doctors pretend to scowl and quietly detour too. Mainstream anchor, crisp as a laurel leaf, Nemesis is attested as a gladiatorial patron deity. Dedicatory inscriptions from amphitheater contexts invoke her. Literary sources, Martial, Statius, sprinkle references to vows, altars, and amulets. Curse tablets aimed at performers and rivals are common across the empire, some naming charioteers, some likely gladiators. Petronius preserves the oath. Galen's notes on his Gladiators and Pergamum mention patients' beliefs alongside poultices. Doctors practice medicine on bodies and myths. The emperor's presence turns superstition into policy. If he attends, you avoid glancing at the pulviner during a bind. Eyes on the belt, not on the god in the box. Some reigns smell of mercy, and you feel bolder about missio. Others posture severity, and you polish humility like a mirror. Historians still argue whether certain emperors consistently favored mercy in ways that altered outcomes. Augustus plays the moderate in prose. Claudius plays indecisive in gossip. Caligula plays Caligula. The evidence winks. The fighters adjust. You trade charms the way soldiers trade jokes. A luck coin passes from Retiarius to Secutor and back again on alternating days. A sprig of garlic, the camp superstition that warded off insects and cowardice way back in our legionary sections, goes into the ludus stew, for fortitude. A scrap of old rudis wood hangs by a thawing in the armory, touched on the way out by anyone who believes retirement rubs off. The medicus keeps a bowl of survivor tokens, stone slivers, bent rivets, a tridentine filed smooth. Men add to it after close calls. He shakes it like a rattle when a patient pities himself too loudly. Light joke 4. A provocator refuses to fight on dies nefasti in auspicious days. The editor says all days are auspicious when he paid for them. Light joke 5. A capsarius claims he can smell bad omens. The armorer says that's just porridge. Light joke 6. A boy asks if touching the standard in the pampa brings luck. The usher says it brings fines. Your opponent has his own liturgy, and you can read it if you watch. The murmillo who kisses his belt plate before first step worries about his midline. The Thraex who bounces twice before feint will overcommit on the third. The Retiarius who coils his net clockwise always circles left when panicked. Superstition leaks tells. Habit hides inside it like a fox under a cloak. The Summa Rudis knows these too, that Batten is part metronome, part exorcist. Historians still argue the boundary between superstition and strategy in sources. Do writers label a man lucky because he timed well, or did timing grow from ritual's calming effect? Modern sports psychologists would smile at a Roman who tightened his greave and thereby tightened his mind. The debate runs in circles elegant enough to deserve a laurel. You step out of the circle and go sharpen a blade. After victory, thanks is a schedule. You hang the palm on the little shrine in the ludus. You pour a thimble of wine on the threshold. You give the medicus a fig because he glared you into honesty last week. If you received missio, you keep your voice low for a day. Nemesis counts syllables. And you replace a strap that almost failed because gods help those who help their quartermaster. If defeat visits hard, attendants give the mercy thrust with the same ritual that made your oath sharp. Afterward, the sand is raked, the trumpet salutes, and the shrine receives another coin for a soul that has finished its contract. You don't watch that part when you can help it. Your superstition there is simple. You leave the gate with your eyes ahead. Quirky tidbit 2. Some fans wear tiny lead depictions as pendants, not curses, but counter-curses, etched with unbind N. They wave them during missio moments like tiny legal briefs. Another, a few editors keep a tame goose in a back room. For auspices. Claiming hisses predict cheers. The goose predicts grain. At night the ludus sleeps under a thin film of incense and lamp soot. Somewhere a whispering pair counts throws not sheep. Someone tucks a charm deeper under a pillow. The doctors scratch tomorrow's names beside chalked stick figures of gear matchups. You roll onto your side and rehearse the oath in a third-person whisper as if it belongs to a stranger now. Burned, bound, beaten, killed. It sounds theatrical in the dark. It sounds administrative in daylight. Either way, it has shaped you into someone who believes in both gods and maintenance schedules. Before sleep folds the day, you line up 3 truths like amulets on a string. 1. The oath is a tool, solemn and sharp, that carves a roll out of noise. 2. Ritual is the rhythm that lets skill breathe under an audience's weather. 3. Superstition is a courtesy you pay your nerves so they won't misbehave. In the morning you'll touch the little tin palm leaf, nod to Nemesis, and let the baton baptize your blade again. Between those touches, you will move through chants with the practiced faith of a professional, which is to say you will do the same thing as yesterday with more attention. The gods, if they attend, can admire your footwork. You wake to a rumor and discover it has seating. A fresh poster chalked on the Ludus wall announces a 3-day munus. By generosity of the emperor. Letters fat as loaves, wreaths sketched round the name like compliments that learned carpentry. You already know what this means. The sand will be asked to do more than entertain. It will testify. Rome stages truth the way other cities stage plays, and emperors love a theater with trapdoors. Begin with the obvious script: bread, circuses, and birthdays. Imperial anniversaries, triumph commemorations, dedications of buildings. Each arrives with spectacles that tell a story you can summarize in one sentence. The state is rich, merciful, and in charge. The pampa carries not just gods but policy, statues of captured rivers, personifications of provinces in tidy diadems, banners boasting the number of pears and beasts. For the people. Mainstream fact, carved into coin and copied into schoolboy wax. The Flavians used the Colosseum itself as propaganda. Vespasian built on Nero's lake. For the people. Titus dedicated it with 100 days of shows. Domitian completed its machinery and staged imperial control in visible wood and invisible ledgers. Later emperors. Trajan after Dacian victories, Antoninus for anniversaries, repeat the liturgy. Largesse as legitimacy. You see how mercy is choreographed. The editor's signal during Missio becomes a civics lesson with an audience of 50,000. A spared fighter equals a spared city. A cruel verdict equals a warning dressed as justice. When the emperor raises his hand and the crowds chant crests, the decision pretends to answer noise while actually answering numbers. What policy needs to feel like today? Historians still argue whether emperors habitually lean toward mercy to polish reputations or toward severity to polish deterrence. Sources contradict depending on authors' tastes. Suetonius scolds, Dio sermonizes, Martial flatters, and archaeology shrugs. The safe middle is that mercy and menace alternated like drumbeats, conducted by the state's mood. Light joke 1, a scribe paints. For the people. So large the steward complains there's no room for dates. The scribe replies the people know when they're free. Light joke 2. A vendor says emperors give games to make crowds happy. A sailor says awnings make crowds happy. The vendor sells both palms and shade in his imagination. Light joke 3. The Summa Rudis claims his baton is apolitical. The baton nods diplomatically. The afternoon card can signal foreign policy without a speech. After victories in Dacia, exotic animals from those provinces just happen to appear in morning hunts. After Parthian headaches, the Veneto resembles a little desert with tame ostriches and nervous handlers. After a riot in a province, the arena features a stage piece where bandits, condemned criminals in costume, are caught and executed with theatrical efficiency. No one names names, everyone reads footnotes. Mainstream anchor, triumphal imagery leaks into spectacle. Reliefs and coin types show exotic fauna, captured arms, personified provinces. Literary accounts describe stage myths mapping onto current events. The boundary between entertainment and bulletin dissolves under saffron mist. The imago of the emperor presides. The imperial box, pulviner, frames decisions, even absence speaks. When an emperor is away, a prefect or heir sits in his stead and the crowd practices loyalty on a proxy. During shaky reigns, shows multiply, calendars fatten with holidays that feel suspiciously like handouts. Grain distributions, fermentations, pair with games so full bellies learn gratitude in two registers at once. Historians still argue whether some emperors overspent on games to patch legitimacy. Caligula and Commodus are perennial villains, but the accounting is murky. What's clear? The amphitheater is cheaper than civil war and better lit. You feel propaganda in small gears, too. Posters list not only the sponsor but the gens family backing him. Guilds march in the pampa with banners. A new aqueducts commissioner funds a morning act and has little silver tokens stamped with a dolphin and pure water. The Sparcio rains oil ladles with the sponsor's monogram. A rumor whispers that a tax remission will be announced between bouts. The arena trains the city to associate gifts with faces and faces with order. Quirky tidbit: some editors slip acrostics into posters, first letters spelling their names, so literate fans feel clever while illiterate fans feel equally oiled. Then there are the emperors who step onto the sand and make the script honest in uncomfortable ways. Nero fiddled with theater. Domitian staged torchlit novelties. Commodus, the headline grabber, fought as a secutor against rehearsed opponents, killed animals from a raised platform, and billed the treasury for victories. Mainstream fact with caution tape. The Historia Augusta and Dio paint Commodus as self-advertising gladiator. He fought in the arena in controlled circumstances, earning the crowd's complicated awe and senatorial contempt. He allegedly charged Rome for each appearance. He renames months. He tries to rename patience. The propaganda aim, divine, invincible emperor, collides with dignity and leaves a litter of pamphlets. Light joke 4. A boy asks if the emperor needs a tessera. An usher says the emperor needs nothing but applause, and even that he sometimes brings. Light joke 5. A philosopher declares the games are morally corrosive. A butcher declares they are economically restorative. The vendor sells them both dates. Light joke 6. The armorer says the emperor's helmet never dents. The medicus says that's because it never meets anything. You watch how the Colosseum edits memory. After a fire, restoration inscriptions credit the reigning prince with speed and paternal care. After earthquakes, marble patches prove stability. After bad rains, chipped statues, spontaneously, receive new heads with better cheekbones. Coins circulate with the amphitheater on the reverse. Arches miniaturized into pocket propaganda. People buy bread with monuments and tip barbers with ideology. The building's very existence says the dynasty cares enough to keep the city entertained and organized. That message outlives reigns like a drumbeat outlives a song. Historians still argue. Seating as propaganda vector. Were senators' names on benches a humble brag or a surveillance tool? Do equestrian badges at entrances reinforce status or prevent brawls? Evidence supports both. Named seats both honored and fixed elites. Ushers kept lists. The emperor could witness obedience as well as bestow favors. They also debate whether amphitheater propaganda primarily targeted plebs or elites. Crowds are many but impressions at the podium ripple through power. The honest answer: everyone is the audience. Different lines read differently from different rows. The ritual of mercy sits at the heart of propaganda's grammar. A clean missio after a brilliant bout says, "The state rewards skill and listens to you." A refused missio after a sluggish fight says, "The state punishes failure and you agree with it." Executions at noon paint law in colors even the back row can see. Pardons at noon paint generosity with the same brush. When a vestal's hand flickers for mercy and the emperor nods, Rome narrates itself as a household where stern father and holy aunt raise 50,000 children with coordinated glances. Mainstream anchor, compact and sturdy. Inscriptions and descriptions attest to imperial sponsorship of games as instruments of popularity. Sparsions, fermentations, and coin types interlock with spectacle. The Arch of Titus and the Colosseum's dedication inscriptions are propaganda in stone, later restorations. Under Severans and beyond continued the caregiver emperor, narrative. Panegyrics praise emperors for clement decisions in the arena. Moralists attack the same as pandering, proving propaganda worked well enough to annoy. You notice also the politics of absence. In times of plague or famine, gain, shrink, or pause, the message pivots to piety, expiatory rites, solemn processions, vows to gods, while the amphitheater waits. When order returns, the first show after silence feels like a coronation. The city relearns clapping as if clapping were a civic muscle. Historians still argue whether these pauses tempered appetite or sharpened it. Coin hoards don't clap, texts exaggerate. You trust the sound your chest makes when drums return. Propaganda borrows from your profession's vocabulary: pairing, pacing, spectacle, and missio. An emperor pairs gifts with edicts, paces announcements between acts, stages exotic proof of reach, and grants missio to a city that has fumbled faith. The pampa becomes a moving resume, statues of peace, abundance, and victory smiling as if they ran payroll. The carpenters below hoist not only scenery but sentiment. Saffron sprayers perfume not only air but policy. The summa rudis keeps spouts fair as if fairness itself were on display. It is. Quirky tidbit too, some editors plant paid clappers, laudicini, to start cheers on cue. The crowd usually knows and usually plays along because noise is fun even when rented. A rumor insists that on one festival the Sparcio included tokens redeemable for a bucket of water during a drought. Propaganda so on the nose that noses forgave it. Light joke 7, you've earned an extra. A street poet sells verses praising the emperor's generosity. A child corrects a rhyme. The poet offers a discount. Light joke 8, the foreman of the hypogeum says his capstan team makes emperors look punctual. The steward says punctuality is policy. Beneath the applause, you hear the cost. We counted coins in section 8. Propaganda spends them with intent. A week of games equals months of wages for ropemen. A day of lions equals a barge of grain. A mercy equals good humor in baker lines. A refused mercy equals whispers at taverns. The emperors gamble that spectacle buys time. That time buys loyalty. That loyalty buys quiet. Sometimes the gamble wins loudly. Sometimes it wins quietly. Sometimes it forgets that crowds remember yesterday when posters promised tomorrow. Historians still argue the amphitheater's role in Rome's eventual moral vocabulary. Did propaganda dull citizens or knit them? One school calls the games anesthetic. Another calls them rehearsal for civic attention, shared focus, shared noise, shared relief. You, who have performed under that focus, know the building taught at least one virtue. The city learned to sit together without burning down the stairs. By dust the poster on the ludus wall smudges where fingers trace numbers. Boys practice the emperor's name in big letters. The lanista pretends indifference while checking the clause that says, bonus for star pair. You oil your manica and think about how a raised palm from a box can turn your breath into policy. Tomorrow you will salute and the baton will baptize your blade. Somewhere behind you a scribe will mark tally strokes on a wax tablet labeled applause. You will fight a bout. Rome will fight for an afternoon of agreement. When the palm touches your hand, you will feel wood and propaganda both light, rough, necessary, and you will lift it like a headline. You tighten your helmet strap and hear two voices in your head compete for truth. The arena as a slaughterhouse that never learned moderation, and the arena as a choreographed duel where skill survives as often as it bleeds. Both voices sell tickets. Only one keeps you numbered. You've seen enough sand to know legends are lazy when facts are busy. Tonight you sort the myths from the maintenance, one breath at a time. Start with the loudest tale. Every bout ends in death. The crowd loves that story because it flatters their courage at a safe distance, and poets love it because tragedy scans better than missio. But your wax tablet of results, wins, losses, misses, says otherwise. Inscriptions carve careers with dozens of fights. Mosaics parade palms and crowns as routinely as funerals. The Lannista's ledger would never tolerate a business model that turns every investment into a eulogy. Mainstream fact was sand under its nails. Epigraphic records list long fight series. Victors often receive missio. The wooden sword, rudis, ends careers honorably, not posthumously. Does death visit? Yes, with authority. Does it lurk at the end of every exchange? No, skill and accounting argue it back, frequently. Light joke 1. A sausage seller insists his cousin died in every bout he ever fought. A summa rudis asks how many cousins he has. The seller revises to emotionally. Light joke 2. A boy claims the secutor never misses. The Retiarius says, "Tell that to my net." Light joke 3. A philosopher declares certainty. The sand declares variance. Next myth. Thumbs down means death. Thumbs up means mercy. You could paint that on a tavern wall and sell twice the wine. But the arena's hand talk is more dialect than dictionary. Police verso, turn thumb, probably meant thumb action, more than a fixed up/down binary. A covered thumb, a waved hand, a flat palm. Local habits and editors' theater decided. You watch the summa rudis's baton, not the crowd's wrists, because the baton translates pantomime into procedure. Historians still argue whether any specific gesture was universal. Iconography contradicts. Texts are coy. Modern posters are confident. Safer to say, the editor signaled, the crowd leaned, the baton enacted. Then the chestnut about Christians. They were routinely thrown to lions in the Colosseum. Execution by beast existed. Noon spectacles could be cruel enough to make a butcher pace. But martyrdom narratives often took place in other amphitheaters or in texts shaped by later memory. The Colosseum's status as the singular killing ground is more pilgrimage than paperwork. Mainstream anchor, cautious as a medic, persecutions occurred. Arenas were sites of execution. Which arena and how often is a patchwork? The Colosseum's role is amplified by fame and later devotion. The truth is not smaller. It is less centralized. What about the Naumachia, grand naval battles staged by flooding the Colosseum like a bath with ambitions? You can almost hear water sloshing through the arches and a tour guide's grin. Early dedications may have hosted shallow displays before Domitian filled the understage with lifts and capstans. Afterward, large-scale ship fights belonged to basins built for the purpose. Historians still argue whether the Colosseum ever swam with ships after its hypogeum, engineering size. Unlikely. Poetry shrugs. Perhaps once. And your memory of drains whispers. Not today. Armor mist clanked too. Gladiator helmets blinded men. Heavy gear made movement impossible. You've seen the world through those grills. It narrows, it doesn't erase. Vision shifts to feet and shoulders. Sound drops to a useful thud. Wait. Real but negotiated. Practice with heavier rudis and wicker shield makes iron feel like relief. Fighters sprint, sidestep, feint. You can't sell skill if the costumes won't move. Quirky tidbit. Some helms were silvered or tinned to glitter under torchlight. Glamour is not the same as clumsiness, though it loves to pretend. Then the myth that every pair was a mismatch. Big shield always bullies clever blade. Fishermen always lose to kettles with legs. The program actually thrives on balanced pairings. Murmillo v. Thraex/Hoplomachus. Secutor v. Retiarius. Provocator v. Provocator, because fairness reads better from the cheap seats. The mismatches appear as novelties, rehearsed for laughter, not as the grammar of the day. Mainstream fact neat as a baton. Mosaics and inscriptions list standard matchups. Referees police parody of kit. Editors want suspense, not massacres that make vendors nervous. Gladiators were slaves without agency. Many were enslaved or condemned, yes, and the Ludus's schedule does not ask feelings to RSVP. But others were octorati, volunteers who signed contracts for coin and fame, tangled as those motives are. Contracts specified terms. The rudest meant legal freedom. Retired fighters often became coaches or businessmen. Historians still argue whether volunteers ever formed a majority in particular eras. Evidence varies by city and year. The safe middle claims a mix that changed with economics and fashion. Agency is not a blanket, it's a patchwork you sew from choices and constraints. The arena was lawless. You still have the welt from the Summa Rudis's baton when you forgot to break clean on command. Rules governed fouls, surrenders, equipment integrity, and safety pauses for fallen visors and snapped straps. The afternoon's duel wasn't a brawl. It was a conversation with punctuation. Quirky tidbit. Some May-Rudes wore wide-brimmed hats so everyone could spot law even when dust tried to erase it. Also, yes, the hat looks faintly ridiculous until it taps your shield. Then it becomes theology. Crowds were monsters. You've sat among them and heard more than bloodlust. You've heard grandmothers argue mercy in Section 11. You saw Vestals signal clemency like calm weather. You watched children chant crescents with the sincerity that makes marketing unnecessary. The noon crowd could be cruel. The afternoon crowd often applauded skill over slaughter. The city's conscience is not a single voice. It's a chorus that learns in public. Mainstream anchor. Graffiti praising specific fighters, missio rates implied by long careers, and accounts of crowd pressure for mercy complicate the caricature. Women never fought. Section 10 waved a torch at that. Reliefs, Dio, and Juvenal insist some did, rarely but really. Historians still argue whether bans were total or partial, temporary or global. The neat answer is that novelty met legislation. Both left footprints. Everything was scripted. You've done drills where batons froze staged exhibitions. You've also felt a bout slither off the page into improvisation with teeth. Editors sometimes arrange safe displays for dignitaries. Star tours may have agreed endpoints. But most afternoons leaned on rules, not scripts. The crowd can smell fake the way a lion smells fear. Nobody wants a refund in a building without a refund window. The Colosseum was only about cruelty. It was also an engineering lecture, Section 2, a stagecraft clinic, Section 9, a civics theater, Section 13, an economy with vendors and rope crews, Section 8, a hospital that liked honey, Section 7, a school that prized footwork, Section 4, and a fandom that learned to sit together without arson, Section 11. Cruelty is in the recipe. It's not the only flavor. Light joke 4. A guide claims the arena seated 1,000,000. A sailor says perhaps if they stacked like amphory. Light joke 5. A tourist asks where the naval battles happened. A custodian points to the fountain and says, "There." Light joke 6. A boy says thumbs down means doom. His grandmother says thumbs down means stop poking your sister. Historians still argue. The hard numbers, mortality rates, average ages, percentages of octorati, size of purses, precise seating capacities. Bones whisper, inscriptions boast, poets exaggerate, stones hedge. The responsible truth is cautious. Survival was common enough to create stars. Death was common enough to keep prayers honest. The economy wouldn't function if either were extreme. One last myth clings like sand to oil. Gladiators were the lowest of the low. Social stigma stained them, especially for citizens who signed away status. Infamy laws pinched, moralists spat. But the same city that scolded also carved hearts next to names, bought lamps with Reediarius cartoons, and crowded alleys for a glimpse of a helm carried in a wicker basket. Status in Rome was a braid. Spectacle braided admiration into disgrace until the knot held. You leave the yard with your helmet under an arm and your net over a shoulder, the late light angling into the grill like a careful argument. You know your world is neither noble fantasy nor pure horror. It is ritual and rules, budgets and batons, saffron spray and ash water, garlic charms and coin-scented mercy. Myths travel faster, realities last longer. Tomorrow, when a stranger insists that every bout ends in blood, you will remember the rudis hung in the armory like a diploma, the medicus's bowl of. It could have been worse. The Summa Rudis's hat like a small moving awning, and the way the crowd's chant softened when a raised finger asked to live. You will smile, tighten the strap, and let the sand say the rest. You wake to the sound of hammers in a different century, and realize the arena doesn't end when the trumpet does. It just changes costuming. Your wooden sword, Rudis, hangs from a peg like a diploma that kept its promise, and you join the long line of men, and a few women, who left footprints in sand and then learned to walk on cobbles without the drum. Retirement is its own ritual, a laurel-sized party in the yard, a palm hung on the little shrine to Nemesis, a handshake with the doctors who taught your feet to think. Some veterans stay as trainers, their voices turning from thunder to metronome. Others buy a tavern with a signboard painted as a helmet and a net. A few take their savings to a corner stall by the baths where porridge becomes stew and the ash water tonic becomes a joke no one misses. Mainstream fact to steady this passage: manumission with the Rudis marked the legal freedom of an enslaved fighter. And inscriptions celebrate veterans who became trainers, doctors, referees, some may rudes, or small businessmen. Epitaphs sometimes list fights the way merchants list ships. A palm and crown carved in stone turns a wall into applause that never stops. Families kept memory alive with tablets that admit love in the same breath as numbers. Hilarious fought 18 times, was Mrs. 9, and beloved always. You visit such stones as if they were old colleagues who learned to hold still. You also see the part of the afterlife that hurts to read. Fighters who fell are remembered with careful economy. Name, type, victories, age that is often too small for a face you can still summon. Friends chip a wreath into the rim. A lover smuggles a private word past a stonecutter's stoic chisel. Quirky tidbit: there was a brisk market in the sweat and blood of victors, scraped, bottled, and sold as love potions or cosmetics. Even after a man left the sand, rumor insisted his body still had retail value. You smile and grimace because the city always finds a way to invoice admiration. Then the game itself retires by degrees. Imperial edicts lean toward restraint. Hadrian narrows upper-class dabbling. Later emperors scold municipal budgets and taste. The steady turn of the world's religion adds a new sternness. Bishops thunder, congregations frown, and altars complain that drums are stealing their afternoons. The famous story winds through the 4th and 5th centuries like a procession with uncertain route. A monk named Telemachus, or Almachius, leaps between fighters, outrage breaks the trance, and an emperor, later memory names Honorius in 404, supposedly bans gladiatorial contests. Historians still argue whether this episode happened as told, whether the ban was sweeping or regional, and whether fights dwindled because of law or because the old economy and appetite had already frayed. The sources are late, pious, and persuasive in different proportions. The safe sentence, formal gladiatorial munera fade in the 5th century, unevenly, amid law, logistics, and a new moral weather. Not all spectacle dies at once. Mourning Venetians, beast shows, linger under Gothic and Ostrogothic rulers who respect Roman entertainment almost as much as Roman aqueducts. Mainstream anchor, the last attested public Venatio in Rome, is often given as 523 CE, staged by the consul Anicius Maximus. After that, beasts become stories, and stories become nostalgia. The Colosseum endures earthquakes, notably in 443 and then in 847, repairs, more earthquakes, and the slow repurposing that medieval Rome performs on all its bones. By the 12th century, The Frangipani family fortifies the amphitheater, running walls and towers through its ribs. Later, masons quarry travertine to dress churches that will pray with borrowed splendor. If you walk the aisles in amongst sandals, you might see hermit cells cut into galleries like quiet rebukes to the old noise. Light joke 1. A mason in 1200 says he's liberating stone from idolatry. The Colosseum replies by dropping a pebble into his shoe. Light joke 2. A parish priest sermons that the arena now serves God. A custodian mutters that it once served drains equally well. Light joke 3. A tour guide in 1700 points to the Summa Cavia and calls it the pews for sinners. Everyone nods because everyone qualifies. Memory keeps performing with new costumes. Medieval pilgrims treat the arena as a martyr's reliquary even when documents prefer ambiguity. Renaissance antiquarians sketch arches as if drawing a beloved face from a bad dream. Enlightenment travelers lecture themselves about decadence inside rings of violet evening. Romantic poets compare love to ruins because ruins never argue. By the 19th century, excavations clear the arena floor, expose the hypogeum, and teach stone to confess in sections and captions. By the 20th, restoration campaigns steady the arches, tidy the corridors, and discipline the weeds. Modern spotlights replace saffron mists. The velarium becomes the moon's job. The Summa Rudis's baton evolves into a laser pointer on a docent's lanyard. The legacy doesn't stay in Italy. It emigrates into language. We call any hard job gladiatorial. Any arena of debatin'. Arena. Any short, decisive move a thrust. Sports borrow the aesthetics of entrance and anthem. Referees with whistles inherit the job of keeping passion inside lines. Combat athletes, boxers, wrestlers, mixed martial artists, train with a discipline that would make a doctor's proud. Your old regimen of footwork, breath, and boring excellence survives in every gym where repetition is worship disguised as sweat. The crowd's education survives too. We still cheer skill, boo fouls, and argue about mercy with embarrassing sincerity. Historians still argue whether the Roman games taught cruel habits that echo dangerously or whether they trained a civic attention that modern publics could use. Shared focus, agreed rules, a taste for fairness stout enough to shout for it. The answer may be both. The crowd is still us, with new snacks. Scholars also gnaw on when the Colosseum acquired its pious aura as martyr stage, how the thumb myth conquered poster art, and how much of Rome's modern identity leans on the amphitheater's patient silhouette. Stones do PR now. They have learned it from emperors. You walk one last lap and inventory the callbacks your life made, the ash water tonic that pretended to be medicine and turned out to be statistics. The garlic charm that smelled like Section 12, the Summa Rudis's hat that made law visible, the velarium sailors who taught shade to obey, the stagehands whose capstans made courage punctual, the cook whose porridge tasted like lectures, the crowd that learned to sit without burning the stairs. You finger the Rudis on your wall and think of the day you were Mrs. Reprieved, because skill out-argued bloodlust. Mercy turned out to be policy and prophecy both. Quirky tidbit 2, for dessert. Somewhere in a museum drawer sits a child's terracotta cup with a tiny reed area scratched on it. Trident like a rake, grin accidental. The archaeologist's label reads, domestic ware. You call it souvenir. And you know exactly how sticky with dates those little cups used to be. Another drawer holds a helmet grill with dents arranged like a constellation, the catalog says. Impact marks? You say. Stories. What remains is the habit of looking together. The Colosseum's true legacy might be neither cruelty nor courage, but choreography. Thousands breathing at once when a finger rises, thousands clapping in time when a baton taps, thousands filing out through arches with enough courtesy to last until tomorrow. You practice that legacy in every cinema line and stadium gate, in every quiet mercy when the crowd is loud, in every joke you make to stiffen a friend before their big speech. The sand taught you how to be watched. The seats taught you how to watch well. By evening, the arena glows the exact color of a memory you don't have to own to admire. Pigeons roost where senators once rehearsed opinions. Tourists hold up phones like offerings. A guide explains that the name, Colosseum, probably comes from a colossal statue that isn't there anymore, which is how memory usually works. You stand outside the arches and salute, not a god, not an emperor, but the complicated, durable trick Rome invented. Make the right thing easier than the wrong one, and then rehearse that until even chaos gets bored. You turn away, lighter as you go, and the night air smells, impossibly, faintly of saffron. The city exhales, long and low, and the arches dim themselves by degrees as if someone were drawing a curtain with two careful fingers. You step back from the stones and the day loosens at the shoulders. Straps that bit all afternoon remember how to be soft, and the rhythm that kept time for crowds learns to hum only for you. Street lamps breathe their little gold ovals on the cobbles, and a breeze from the river turns corners with unambitious grace. Everything large has put away its voice. Even the pigeons practice discretion. Let the pace lengthen now. Inhale like a road that has decided to be a path. Exhale like a sail coming comfortably slack. Behind your eyes, the arena empties until the sand is only sand, smooth as a page that forgives notes. The galleries are quiet timber, the hypogeum a cool thought, the batons lay gently down beside a hat that did its duty and then retired to shadow. If a shout tries to visit, let it fade into footfalls, and if a drum insists, let it become your heart taken down to a slower setting. Remember small anchors, a palm leaf on a shelf where the light halos it, a dent in a bronze grill that now reflects only window and sky, a tiny tin charm of a hand raised for mercy. These are soft-weighted things, familiar enough to settle the breath. The crowd is gone. The story has folded itself neatly. The city finds a yawn it doesn't mind sharing. You are allowed, here, to be unimportant and entirely safe. Breathe again, and let edges blur. Somewhere a vendor stacks baskets. Somewhere a carpenter rinses the day's sawdust from his wrists. Somewhere a cat advances the cause of sleep by example. The arches keep their watch, not over spectacle now but over simple dark. Let the last brightness gather where you need it, then dim of its own accord, like an ember that knows both how to warm and when to rest. In, out, slower, softer, good. The sand is smooth, the air is kind, and the night is on your side.